We're going to start, call to order at 9 a.m. Agenda item number 2 is going to be discussion regarding commission initiatives related to the expired process. I know a couple of y'all have issues and questions and understanding the process and understanding what you can and can't do with $200. So we're going to go over this process, and when we leave today, it will be crystal clear to everybody. Right? Right? Okay, very good. And who's going first?
I am.
Okay.
But I'm also trying to share my screen at the same time, so.
Are you doing the current expire spreadsheet?
I'm just gonna do a little bit of an overview so
Okay.
we know how we got where we are. Okay, there it is. Okay, you don't need to look at this yet, screen sharing is not my strength. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm realizing now that my notes are not expecting to share. Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Should we wait for Commissioner Hargraves?
No, he had a
Yeah,
colleague
take
said,
a call.
please start.
Okay. So one of the issues that has been brought to our attention as part of the initiatives was to take a look at the commission's expire process. I want to give just a real high level overview, and then Denise is gonna walk through some of the proposed changes. I'm also gonna bring attention to another issue that has been raised that tends to intertwine, which is the CE deferral fee. But for purposes of today, what we're really looking at is the expire process. So I will start with the CE deferral fee. This is just for explanation and because the two end up getting a little bit meshed together. So at the commission, it's a statutory authorized provision that the commission may charge or may allow folks to pay a continuing education, so we say CE, continuing education deferral fee, meaning that they can still renew, but they pay an extra amount of money for more time to take their classes. So if they haven't taken their classes for whatever reason, they can still go through that renewal process, still practice, they just get some extra time to take those courses. So there's an active component to that. It's still a renewal, right? It's a decision that's being made. Hey, I didn't make it in time. I've got these classes scheduled out, et cetera. And so the statute allows us to do that. It says we may do it. The commission has done that historically. So that's the process. We have that in place right now. And I know that that is something that we want to have further discussions on, and the commission has asked about it. It's come up quite a bit. The other issue that has come up, so I'm going to move away from just that explanation of that CE deferral fee and what that looks like, is the expire process. So current, and Denise is going to walk through this. I'm going to give a very high level summary. The issue that has been raised has been, why is it that there are agents who are expired who practice and we don't, there's no, if a complaint is filed, we don't pursue that. And the answer is because if they, within a certain amount of time, I'll let Denise explain this much better than I do, but there's a certain window in there where folks can be expired when they come back to renew within the certain time period. Their broker can attest and say, I was supervising them the whole time, we're good. And then we set them back as though they had never had that unlicensed activity. They show as having been fine in our system. And there were commissioners who found this problematic, right? Understandably so. Your license is expired. Why are you still able to do this? Why is there this window? And so we were charged with looking at that and changing it, right? That's one of the initiatives. So Abby and I and Denise and I always want to say Cynthia, but it's not Cynthia. in your team?
Tina.
Tina and Denise's shop, we all sat down, we had the rules, started looking at them, look at the process. And of course, what we thought would be like, well, just cross out this one word is much more complicated. And so we have been through a few iterations of rule drafts. Today, instead of bringing you draft rule language, which is often really hard to read and confusing, we actually just want to walk through what the current process looks like and what the new process would look like with the rule change. You'll see it, should this move forward, you'll see the rule language changes as you would at any meeting. We can walk through that. But all of us actually found it a lot easier to walk through how it works. It's a lot less confusing. And so Denise is going to take care of that. There's two. Well, before I say that, I will say that CE deferral fee that I mentioned earlier, I didn't just bring that up for fun. One is that there are some issues with that we will look at separately, not in today's meeting. But two, you're going to hear about the CE deferral fee because it naturally comes in when we're talking about people expiring, people renewing their licenses, et cetera. So that CE deferral fee is still in there, and I think that's how it gets intertwined. But just know there are other issues and we're kind of parking those right now. And we're just looking at the process. So before you today, you're gonna see those processes. There's two key considerations in this. One is the financial implications of the changes. And that's something that Denise will discuss, Chelsea, but that's something to pay attention to, right? Because there's financial implications to what we're doing and what it can look like, just considerations to know when making a change. So that's always important from a policy standpoint. And two, when this was originally raised, it was, we're talking about that broker attestation, right? Sales agents practicing and being able to get that broker attestation of like, no, they're good, I supervised them the whole time. In the draft rule language, we contemplate inspectors in the new change of not letting inspectors have that look back process. That was taken to the inspector committee and everyone loved the idea of eliminating the look back for inspectors. What is probably not as obvious is that this same process also actually applies to brokers. There's no attestation because they are the broker. But they also get that look back provision. And we have currently drafted it to also the new rule language to include eliminating it for brokers as well. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out, it's not just that sales agent situation that has arisen. And the way we currently have it drafted, it will apply to inspectors and to brokers as well. In the interest of it applying to everyone, that consumer protection component, the an expired license, the practice, things like that. So I just want to give a heads up on that. And that's a consideration point for you all that we have not discussed before is the application of this to brokers.
Okay, what's the mission of the day on this topic?
Mission of the day is to look at the current process and the new process, financial implications, and let us know what you think. If we like where this is headed, you'll likely see a rule proposal in November that matches what the process that Denise is going to take you through, the new process. First, you're going to go through that old process.
So we can kind of test that. We wanted to get your guidance on potential rule changes so that what you see in November is what you want it to be. Right.
So the only time you would actually do the look back is if our agent got a complaint while they were in that expired deferred period.
Are you talking about the current process right now?
Yeah. Right now.
The current process and the way we described it at the last meeting or at a previous workshop was that when an agent late renews, their broker has the option to check a box on the late renewal sponsorship form that either says, yes, I was supervising this sales agent the whole time they were expired, or no, I'm only going to cover them from the date that they renewed going forward. I'm not covering that time they were expired. So what it does is it puts any complaints that come in for the first 6 months after an expiration date kind of in limbo, or where Mike and enforcement, his team can't really do anything because the broker could still come in and check that box and then that activity was okay.
what we do
I'm
is,
just behind it.
if we get a complaint,
Check
we
it
have a
out.
letter we send out and say, there's this process that's in place. If the person does renew within 6 months, this activity is not considered activity, and if CC's the broker and says, look, there's been a complaint filed, you need to get on top of things and get this person renewed.
I
So-
believe you just did
So
that too,
basically,
like that,
we
right?
hold it kind of there for a little bit, and 9 times out of 10, they'll like go renew it. If they don't, then we just proceed with unlicensed activity.
Didn't you just send two to a broker recently about somebody working with expired licenses? And the broker.
Oh, you mean the order?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was people that went past the 6-month
Right, yes.
period, yes.
And as a practicing broker, I'm not sure which one to check. Jason's license expired. I told him, you don't list, you don't sell, you don't hand out cards, you are unemployed, stay at home. And then a week later or whatever, he gets it, and I have to check, I was supervising during all this time, or I'm only taking responsibility. Well, I was supervising, but he was doing no activity, so as a broker, I'm gonna check, I don't know the guy. I mean, I'm not for sure. You follow me? Because we have policy that says you don't do anything, but then I've gotta say, oh, I supervised him during this inactive period, but it doesn't say he wasn't doing anything. So, yeah, it's a
So
funny form.
it might help to start out with kind of reviewing the current process. So if you look at the top, it's got the circle, the 90-day notice circle in like a beautiful purple color, magenta type color. So the current process, and it helped us when we were walking through and kind of explaining it to come up with people's names. I just realized we weren't, this isn't Ben Pena, this is a sales agent named Ben.
I am not a realtor nor a broker.
That's right, not our public member, Commissioner Pena. This is just, we just made up some names to put in here, it kind of helped. We were also gonna maybe put some stock photos, but that didn't pan out. But, so, Ben receives a notice about his license renewal, takes no action. His license expiration date arrives. So now Ben is expired. He completes his CE and submits his renewal application between, the license expiration date and those first 60 days. So what Ben is gonna get charged with when he renews is a late renewal fee that's set out by the rules and a CE deferral fee. What this will do is renew Ben's license active because we never ended the relationship with his broker. It is a retroactive license. That's a system limitation. So it does restore the license to also give them a 2-year license period. We have an obligation to issue licenses for no less than 2 years. So hence that retroactive renewal. But he's active, his broker confirms and attests, and we don't collect that data on those late sponsorship forms. We just don't have a mechanism to track that, but I can tell you anecdotally, most of the brokers check, yes, I was supervising, that was not unlicensed activity, and then there's no unlicensed activity enforcement action to take. If Ben were to request an active and an inactive license history, it would show he was active since 1992 or however long he's been licensed. That would not be reflected as a period of inactivity on his certified license history.
So if I go look up a realtor or a broker online and look at his status, does it switch to expired or is it active?
It will switch to expired when they expire. So the current process, there's rule language and a late renewal sponsorship form that allows that broker to say, no, I covered him for that whole 60 days.
Yeah, but you won't know until.
We won't know until the renewal's expired.
Right. So on the day that I expire, it'll still remain active?
Well, it'll show as expired, which,
Even though I'm expired and the status should be expired, will my status on the system be expired? If there's a lookup, will it say expired or
It'll
active?
say expired, and then
Yes.
it retroactively goes back and says active.
then it'll say active.
With no gap?
With no gap, right?
Okay.
Right, so if you look at it right after the expiration date, it will show as expired.
Okay.
But license holders have an opportunity to late renew, there's a late renewal process. So once they late renew, it'll just switch to showing,
So the expiration date triggers a correspondence?
yes. All throughout here, starting with the 90 days before the license expires, and I overlooked that, we send out a 90-day renewal notice, we send out a 60-day renewal reminder, And we send out a 30-day, what we call the final reminder. It's real short and sweet and says, you expire in 30 days, you need to get your license renewed. And then a few days after the license expiration date, because we're allowing for things to come in by mail, we send out a notice that the license has been expired.
Then it goes to the broker as well.
All of those communications get copied to the
All those.
broker.
Do you have a sense of, I wonder how many of these happen? 230,000 licenses or whatever we have now. I mean, how often does this event occur, roughly?
We don't have data on that other than information that is related to how many pay a CE deferral fee and renew late. So that's roughly about 1,500 a year of just sales agents that are participating in this process like Ben.
And what is that fee?
That's a $200 CE deferral fee.
Okay.
They don't get, just because they have late deferrals and they pay the $200, we really don't, I mean, you shouldn't have to worry about those unless they get a complaint, right? This question is just if they get a complaint, you're gonna do special.
Well, in November, you commissioners in your November workshop, I think is correct. That's when you charged us with, look into this because
So
the
last
concern, yeah, last November. The concern was that a broker could check a box and that sales agent could have been performing, engaging in real estate activity with an expired license.
So do you ever get instances where an agent or a broker does not attest that you were supervising that agent?
Yeah,
And has there been any complaints during that time when they were expired? How often does that happen?
that I don't have data on. We don't capture that information of how many brokers check that box that they're not gonna cover that time that the license holder was expired. But Mike, would you have any anecdotal on?
Not really, I mean, we would just look at the fact that they've gone past that 6-month period. It means they were truly expired, so we can enforce unlicensed activity. We don't necessarily look at the yes or no question from them, because if you get a no question, then it means they were truly expired, so we can proceed.
Let me reframe the question. After someone expires, do you have many cases where someone was practicing without a license and a complaint was issued that you had? How many of those do we have? In other words, they were truly unexpired, the broker didn't attest to supervising those agents, and that you had a complaint of.
Good amount of our unlicensed activity stuff are people that go past that 6 month window. It's not, it's usually license holders that go, either been expired for a while or expire a short period that they commit unlicensed activity. Not people off the street.
And the disciplinary action comes against in cases of an agent, the agent and not the broker, or the agent and the broker?
So the broker was working with the agent. They can be disciplined as well because they didn't keep on top of their agent renewing. There's also a violation of the statute because they were working together with someone that should or should not have been licensed.
So,
There's plenty of tools in our toolbox.
I mean,
So
one
we do
thing
so.
is if you have the broker level, if you're aware that it's expired, then one remedy here would be to terminate it, right? Yeah, from your, I mean, it's from, terminate your sponsorship, and then I know that doesn't always happen because we don't always maybe know that sort of thing.
But to me, it comes back to broker responsibility.
Right.
If we are responsible for these people
I agree.
I mean, I have the same thing in place, and I've had it in place since we were fined 25 years ago, $8,500 over a licensed lady that said she'd taken the courses and then she really hadn't, and we didn't check. So by golly, we send out the same letters y'all do, and we terminate everything that our agents are doing I think Scott, you said you do the same thing.
We move
They
it to
don't list.
managers.
They don't take phone duty,
Yeah.
they don't come in the office until you get your courses taken and reinstate yourself, you're out.
Yeah, I mean, that's our view of the world.
That's your
I
best
hope it
practice.
Right.
Yeah, I hope it happens every time, you know, that's.
I didn't even know you were gonna test it.
But
And
also
that's-
they're responsible, there's a lot of pay-to-play places that don't even know who works for them. Like, I've made 2 calls in the last couple of weeks, and they're like, who did you ask for? They have no clue who even works in the office.
And then I would think enforcement would look and say the broker did not have the policies and procedures to track that, and the broker might have some liability at that point.
So we instituted an internal policy, I think back in January, or, yeah, about there. Where I drafted where if we get a complaint against a sales agent that has been expired, that's within this window or right past the 6 months, we automatically, we either on a separate case number or a part of that, will join in the sponsoring broker and find out what happened. If they have policies and procedures in place and it seems that they were attempting to be on top of it, they may get like an advisory letter or something like that. But if there's been more egregious things where like they don't have any policies and procedures in place, or they truly knew this was going on because they paid them, we've had people, you know, over the past few months where they paid sales agents multiple money on transactions, and they're not double checking this stuff that's going on. For me, that crosses the line, and that's where you're probably gonna get an agreed order if you're a broker. So,
I just pulled up your table yesterday and we're on 88 out of a year that, I think this is the year. Yeah, it's a whole year. 88 out of all your complaints were for unlicensed activity. So you don't have that many that fall into this category.
No, but
I'd be
that's-
strict about broker
For
responsibility.
me, this is a really common sense thing, and it really goes to the heart of consumer protection, because there's agents out there that are not licensed, and I don't know how that impacts, E&O insurance,
Well-
so that even gets even more.
You're gonna bring that up,
I don't know that part, but
Yeah.
it just,
Seriously.
it's been an important thing for me to get, you know, some of these brokers that don't have policies in place to show them that we're serious about this.
And the direction that we were headed in with the rule draft language was to address that ability for that broker to check the box. You know, obviously, the best practices are, you know, similar to what you described. And so
Yeah, I'm not sure.
the draft rules in these scenarios are to address eliminating that ability for that broker to just check a box and say, oh yeah, I covered them for, in the case of Taylor, up to 6 months. So Taylor in green on that handout can renew up to, you know, 5 months and 29 days past the expiration date. She'll pay a late renewal fee, a CE deferral fee, and a late CE reporting fee. So that's a fee that is due when you take your CE more than 60 days late. And so she renews late, is active, her broker can check that box, and that entire 6 month, almost 6 month period will reflect as continuously active time. That's our current process.
6 months.
Oh, okay. So the difference between Ben and Taylor is Ben renewed within the 60 days, correct?
Correct.
Taylor renewed after the 60 days, but prior to the 6 months. But both of them had to pay the deferred renewal fee immediately, or theoretically.
In order to renew, because of the fact that it would be renewed active.
Okay.
So after 6 months, what happens?
After 6 months, the license is no longer renewable. So the only option for a license holder would be to file a reinstatement application. And they have up to 2 years past the expiration date to file a reinstatement.
Do they have to retake the exam?
Yes,
After 2 years.
2 years.
If they go beyond the 2 years past the expiration date, then yes, now they have to take the exam. Any new courses that might have been added to the requirements, if they got licensed, 15 years ago and now we require 2 new courses, they would also have to take the new coursework and sit for the exam if they go beyond the 2 years.
When we get our license, we are told, our salesman's license, you have to take these courses in order to renew the first time, and then the second time. They've known for 2 years that they had to take 18 hours. It ain't much. And it's not enough, actually.
You have to renew before your expiration date. And how many, percentage-wise, and I know I'm asking for data that you probably don't have, percentage-wise, how many cross the expiration date life into the expired status out of 237,000?
Anecdotally, a lot.
Yeah,
A lot,
A
I would
lot,
imagine,
a lot.
yeah.
With the sales agents being our largest license holder population, that is an option that's available to them to late renew that they take advantage of quite often.
Yeah.
And it's, you could say it's low risk for them because their broker can attest and then they can keep trucking along, keep working.
The 6 months though.
Right.
But what's the percentage of agents that after 6 months?
Oh, and I misunderstood your question, so
Yeah.
thank you, Commissioner Williams. That, I don't have that data, but I can, we can get that for you. But,
So-
the renewal rate hovers for sales agents around 75 to 80%. So the other percent are the ones that, and what we report on with the renewal rate, those are the license holders renewing timely. So the late and the ones who never renew and go beyond the 6 months, they make up that remaining percentage.
I would guess that most people go, when they get their first notice, they put it aside. The second notice gets your attention. I just renewed. The second notice, I got my, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
That one may just sit up.
yes.
Okay, that's good
Good job,
feedback.
Denise.
Yeah. So what we can do then is walk through the proposed process. That might either answer some questions or generate more, and this will help kind of guide us in the direction we need to go in. And if everyone's using the paper, I can just proceed, although
I'm almost there.
for Delora, yeah. There we go. All right, so the proposed process would change how we handle things by which, if a license holder is not renewed by their license expiration date, we're going to automatically set that license to expired and inactive and terminate that relationship with their sponsor. So I guess, what Commissioner Woodruff described of we'll terminate them, or what Commissioner Miller described, we'll terminate them. We're proposing that we would handle that process systematically, automatically. I'm sure if Steve Rapp were here, he would be like, oh, there's a lot more to it, but.
It's not that simple.
Right. But we would, we're proposing setting that license to inactive. So in the case of Ben would take no action, his license would expire, and now he is inactive and does not have a sponsoring broker on file on the website, anywhere if he were to log in to the system. So when he goes
may not
to,
engage in real estate activity,
right,
period, paragraph.
I think that's correct.
Right.
And I think that takes care of your E&O problems too.
Yeah.
Certainly helps.
so then when Ben goes to submit his renewal, he's now late. He is going to be renewed inactive, but he also doesn't have to take CE to renew, because we're going to issue it inactive because we've just ended his relationship with his sponsor. So he pays a late renewal fee and is renewed on inactive status. So now Ben's license is inactive, and in order to decide, okay, I've taken my CE, I want to come back to active, he'll have to request sponsorship from a broker, and that, that's all done online, but it will not go through and set him to active if he has not completed those CE hours that were required for the renewal.
And pay the fee.
And, well, there's no longer a set to active fee. The sponsorship request is free for license holders. So what the other added bonus is that in Ben's license history, if we were to draft one up for him, it would show expired or inactive, from the license expiration date until the time he completed CE and obtained a new sponsorship, either with the same broker he's always had or a new broker.
And so now if a complaint is filed during that period,
It's
Then
very
we
black
have-
and white.
then we
that
have
that license
Or you
holder
don't
was
have to file during
inactive.
that period.
No,
But,
even
yeah,
afterwards.
Even afterwards, yeah,
Yeah,
after 4 years, yeah.
but you have it on record that he was
Yes, sir.
not current and not allowed to practice.
It would clearly delineate that period of time as inactive.
So
And in that scenario, Michael, so, then if there's a complaint filed that subsequently that occurred, during that inactive period of time, then that's on the licensee, not on the broker, right? I mean,
Provided that the broker was not
involved.
involved.
I take that.
That's true.
Yes.
Denise, speaking of that, and I may be wrong, so when you press license history right now, it just shows the classes you've taken. It doesn't show sponsorship or anything else, correct?
Correct. I'm talking about the ones that they submit a form and we manually pull up that information
Right.
to say, Leslie Lerner was active from this date to this date. And, and
Is our new system gonna be able to show all of that?
We want it to.
We want it to.
Okay.
Yeah, we want it to. You're always gonna have issues with the historical data.
Right.
It will likely handle it beautifully for data from when we are on a new system going forward.
Right, exactly.
That trickier part, and because right now, when a license, active and inactive, or a sponsorship history is submitted, we have records from the system we were on before Versa. So that's why it requires a manual review to interpret that information, that data, and say confidently, yes, these are all the active times going back to 1988, 1987 in some cases. So I don't know that we'll ever be able to have a system that will,
Right, but I mean.
Pull that
you
up
can always
automatically,
put
but-
the little fine print, this started on whatever date.
right, we hope so.
Well, I just pulled one up on license history and it shows he's active, original license is issued in '07, but he actually had it expire for 2 years, had to go back, retake the test. But if you look at the classes, he went from '08 to '19, so there was a spot there where he was expired. My only problem with moving it inactive is if they come interview with me and they say my license is inactive, it might actually be expired
Mhm.
during that time, and I don't know that as a broker.
Didn't you say it would say expired and inactive?
It would say expired, and that is kind of the
That's what the status would be.
superseding status, so that's what would show on the website. However, when they go to renew late, so anytime after they've expired, they would show current inactive, because we've terminated their relationship.
After they've done their CE.
After they've renewed.
Okay, very good, okay.
But they don't have to take CE to renew inactive.
Right.
So it does kind of change the mindset.
Do they still get the $200 leeway to go take CE in that 60-day period?
With this proposed process, no, because currently the way it works is because we're going to renew you active, you're paying that CE deferral fee to defer it for another period of time, but you're getting an active license when you late renew. And so with this proposed process, we'd be setting them to an active so that CE deferral fee would no longer be.
You said about
Can you have a
1,500.
late renewal fee?
The late renewal
200?
fee would still,
Yeah.
well, that's set by rule, or statute, is it?
Both.
Yeah, it's the amount of the late renewal fee, I think by statute it says it's 1/2 of the renewal fee is late penalty, and then if they go 90 days late, it's another, 2 times, so.
I just want to clarify something for Mr. Miller. The 60-day deferral would still be available to them prior to their expiration date, but not after it, with this new process. I just wanted to clarify that, because it doesn't go, with the
They
new
can still
process, it doesn't,
defer.
they can still defer, they just have to do it before they renew.
As long
So
as they do
have
it
to pay-
timely.
They have to, before they renew timely, they could pay that fee, and that 60 days could be added at that time. So they renew, and then they have the 60 days. But if they expire, they wouldn't have that option anymore. So I just wanted to clarify
But
that.
at least that means they have to be proactive.
Right,
Right,
exactly, yes, sir.
To know that they've got a problem,
Yes, sir.
to ask for the deferral.
right. This proposed process does not change a timely renewal at all, where they can say, at 2 weeks, I have not signed up for my classes. My expiration date is 2 weeks away. I'm just gonna renew now. I'm going to defer for 60 days.
And then, under that scenario, so let's say 60 days passes, they don't take their continued in.
Our current process is we set them to inactive.
Yeah.
after
At
that.
expiration date, so at expiration date, they become brokerless and they go to an
Not if they pay the deferral fee. They're renewed, they just get
Right.
switched to inactive
If they
status.
do it timely, they elect to defer.
But
Yeah.
they're
They
talking
have-
about
yeah.
after the 6
If you're, are you
Well,
talking
there's-
about timely or late renewal?
I'm talking about at expiration date, what happens, right?
If you have not renewed, yes,
You become
set to
inactive and
expire, we
right,
drop your
right.
broker,
But like he said, you have the ability to ask for the 60-day deferral
as long as it's
prior to expiration,
Right.
which is not available after expiration.
Correct.
under the
So-
proposed process.
At expiration date, you're unauthorized to practice real estate.
So how would you renew at that time? Just no
You would
deferral,
renew inactive.
just no
Help me, help
deferral.
me out a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah.
It's out of 230,000, about 1,500 people go through this process?
Who late renew and take advantage of that look back.
So it's 1,500 people out of 230,000.
Approximately,
the
it's kind of hard
200,000
data.
I mean, what are we
to-
doing? We go through a long process here, about 1,500 people, right? Is
Well,
that what we're doing?
No.
one piece of it is
It is a
1,500
big
too.
thing.
It's because human nature and human behavior dictates that everybody will try to do their requirements to renew on the day of expiration and perhaps afterwards.
I
And
get
it creates, there's more than 1,500 that teeters the line, right? I mean, there's more, and it's administratively,
That's why the call center has all those calls on the 29th of the month.
Yeah.
So all of them
Right.
are calling you saying, what do I do, what do I do?
Well, one thing we were
charge them
hoping,
$200, all right? Okay,
one thing we were hoping would come
I'm
of.
about the money all the time. Right now, I heard that we're gonna lose money. That's the
Right.
only thing I'm hearing, from where I see it. But I will follow the team. I'm a team player.
Well, one thing that we were hoping would happen, would come with the proposed process is a lot of communication, a lot of education to say exactly what Commissioner Miller said earlier. You've got 2 years. There really is no reason to wait until you get your renewal reminder from us. You can renew, like Commissioner Russell, you can start taking your CE for the next renewal this week if you'd like. It's okay that it's 18 months ahead of schedule. And so that's, kind of what we were hoping would be a side effect.
Yeah, a change of behavior, so.
Right.
Charge them more money.
That's the way to do it.
It's the best way to do it. Charge them more
So the
money.
lawyers have that problem?
They'll get it right. You stick with the same process, charge them more money, you won't have to go through it.
Is $200 statute?
Yeah, it caps, you're talking about the 60-day deferral, it's capped at 200, you can't go over that amount.
Yeah.
It does not exceed 200.
Sorry,
Oh, you can't?
Is the 6 months a statute?
That's statute.
That needs, 6 months is a long time.
Well, and correct. It says a license cannot be renewed once it's been expired.
Right, correct.
Just to be clear, the way that's
They do want to come back.
written. A license cannot be renewed after it's been expired for 6 months.
But that's by statute, right?
Yes, sir.
From a rule wise, we can make it before, maybe?
I don't think so, because the way the statute is written, and I'm not looking at it right now, but it's that there is a fee that is charged for this window of time before 6 months. And so I think the way the statute is worded, it doesn't give us flexibility to shorten that time period.
Yeah, I think it contemplates a 6-month late renewal, because it's a bifurcated fee, there's a
Yeah.
late fee, and then after a certain point, it's twice, or it's 1.5 times, and then it's twice, so
Right.
there's like a time frame in there. So I think the statute contemplates that late
That
renewal
whole
period
period.
is 6 months.
Yeah.
How much is it financially if is the hit if we change the way we're doing it presently?
Our guess is about $500,000 a year
I would
in
say 4.
fees.
If we change it.
But,
If we change it to be more strict?
yes,
cutting
because
down
we're
$500,000.
collecting fewer fees. We're basically pulling away certain types of late fees.
Well, that's if we implement the proposed process.
Yeah, but, there's something about how to do that. In terms of the industry and the consumer, and we do have, a big surplus we keep talking about trying to spend. So I mean, there's that side of it that, or you raise some other fees. depends.
I also think it might change behavior some when you have more people paying the CE deferral for the extra
Okay.
60 days. Like, I think this
I
could
think
be
that's
an
right, too.
experiment.
So
No, that's a good
if they don't pay it before, they're inactive. They can't do anything but inactive.
Correct.
So if you have somebody and they've been lazy, have not renewed, they wake up on the second of the month or else they have to renew, they're inactive. They can't pay you $200. At least the $200 deferral is reserved for the people that say, oh, my lands, I did not get my classes.
Right.
At least
They're
halfway.
They're responsibly understand
That's
that they're.
They're responsible, they're responsible.
Right.
Okay.
Can't, as you get these notices, I'm thinking that you can go ahead and pay your renewal fund, your renewal money to say, okay.
No, you cannot.
Yeah, you can.
Go ahead.
You can pay the renewal money and still not take the courses, and so you know at that point, I've still got that 60 days, I'm gonna have to pay $200 more, right?
Well, the way the system currently works is because of the system limitation, honestly, is we can't go back and say, oh, this person renewed timely and then did not take their CE. It's calculated at the time that they go into renew.
Let me give you an example. Won't say any names, but a lady in our office is renewing last month, and she gets on, she's taking her 3-hour contracts class on the 17th. She renews on the 15th, has to pay the $200 referral fee. Even though the classes are gonna be finished within the time, she was timely to pay, and you cannot pay without paying the late renewal fee if all CE is not posted.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
If you raise a stink, we'll reimburse you.
Right.
But you gotta raise a stink.
Yeah.
Which we
So
will.
anyway, and she's like, where's my $200? And I said, what's paying for my night at the embassy? Yeah, but I did not know that until last month, yeah.
And that's been the process since 2015.
Yeah.
Since 2015.
That's on our list.
And I know a lot of our people have said, well, I paid my money, yeah, but you didn't take your courses.
Right.
And so we slap them around a little bit and take all their listings away and put them in the manager's name. And then when they get their courses done and when they're reinstated, then we give them their listings back.
So if they've taken all their classes
If something.
and haven't paid, they'll be inactive, so thus all they have to do is pay.
Pay for the renewal, request sponsorship.
If things
There
were
won't be
pended
additional fees.
before they expired, then they would get those commissions.
If not, so
If not,
too bad, so bad.
yeah, buddy, so pay attention.
Well, and I will say that part of the current process is that if a license holder renews, so the nameless example that Chair Kestner provided, that person, when they renewed on the 15th, received an additional letter with their license, their renewed license that said, your renewal included a $200 CE deferral fee, and it's calculating the date by which they have to complete their CE, the end of the 60-day deferral. You will be inactivated if you don't have your CE completed by that date.
But just supposing this lady could have taken her class on the 19th of the month that she expired, then it would be posted. I think the law for the providers is you have to post it within 24 hours or 48 hours.
It's 10 days.
Yes.
Oh, it is, okay.
Most of them are pretty quick.
You're right,
We
because
tried
it's in their best
No,
interest to.
I think it's in their
to
best
post it.
interest too, but it is, they do have.
So it's posted, and we are, every class I teach, I say, anybody license expire the end of this month. And so now our classes are all set the first 2 weeks of the month, so we don't have to have that.
And I do believe, and Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody's renewing online and they're renewing prior to a class and they still have a class, I believe the system tells them they're gonna be charged that $200 fee.
That's what you just,
Like, it tells them that, so they have the ability to,
Yeah, before they
yeah,
actually
even the
submit.
notices they get a notice as well, but even before they click accept, the system says you're about to be charged a $200 referral fee, you know.
it's a code, RDR, realtors don't read.
Well, I did, yeah, I get that, but I mean, we do try to encourage them that if there is a bit of time to wait to renew, and I know people wanna there are people who wanna do it soon, and we get that, but.
But the expiration date isn't moved, never changes, because I know I've been May since the beginning of time.
Yeah, and that's the one thing which, I recognize after all these years, it's not this way. But personally, there's never been a question that mine renews October 31st, every 2 years. And, I don't get it how this happens, but I do get it that it happens because I hear these.
And you can deposit earnest money on the first day.
Right.
A broker entity, where sometimes renewing broker entities, especially if it's your first renewal, you don't understand all the bylaws and everything. But if it's expiring and you have the stuff sent in and you get a letter saying you're missing the NO or you're missing the minutes of the corporation, whatever you're missing, you can still pay that $200 before. But if it's after, you're inactive. And I'm kind of worried about the broker entities because sometimes you're renewing them the first time or even second time if there's a partnership change. It's a lot more complicated.
Well, a business entity does not have CE requirements. So that falls specifically on an individual license holder. So an individual broker, an individual sales agent. A business entity, the only requirements are, like you described, the ownership documents, the E&O, if the designated
Less than
broker does
10%.
not own 10%. So the CE would only come into play as it relates to the designated broker's individual broker license.
So if the deadline was not met, it would show inactive.
If
It really
you
doesn't.
elect to apply this proposed process to the brokers, then there are those implications to any business entity license that individual broker is a designated broker for. So if they have not completed CE, but actually now I'm thinking this through, I don't believe that it would change the process because right now, if an individual broker license expires,
It's expired.
a few days after that expiration date, the license is set to expire, the business entity is dropped. This is what triggers the phone calls to our office because then after that, all the agents sponsored by the business entity get inactivated.
So this doesn't impact that at all.
That won't change the current process. Yeah, for the business entities.
I see this as if we really make definite cutoffs, it could help enforcement catch all those brokers that are not being responsible and are not, whether it's just 88 or 1,500, that are not being responsible for their people and the complaints come through, we could slap their hands harder, I would think, than just send them an advisory letter. Get their attention, because they are the brokers that are not taking responsibility, to me, are the cause of 90% of the issues that we talk about around this table.
I mean, it would clearly delineate that license was inactive during this specific period of time.
And
So,
these people who don't even know they have a sponsor, and if you call me, I don't know half our people's names either, but there's somebody in our company that knows. But again, I think we've got to make the brokers responsible, and that's how you get trained agents and how you get people filling out contracts correctly and all that.
Start at the top.
What's wrong with the new process? What do y'all see
Proposed.
in the new proposed process?
I guess it's a good question. I guess the question is there a $500,000 line item? And we don't, maybe there will be, maybe there won't, but I still think the process is right. Now, if an economic issue that maybe needs to get discussed.
And
Different.
I say this a lot, you and I were joking about it yesterday. At the beginning of this fiscal year, when we start the year, before we collect a single piece of revenue, a single fee, we'll start the year with $24 million in the bank.
Yeah.
And what that does is gives us a runway. Is that $500,000 accurate? Is behavior change? There's a lot of variables on that estimate, and I call it a back of the napkin estimate a little bit.
Yeah. Yes.
So what we have is a runway to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think, and I think we collect data for a year I mean, even longer to see what this change does to the behavior and what it does to our bottom line.
Yeah.
And we'll toggle. We haven't increased fees in 10 years, longer? 2014, 8 years. So if this is the reason why we need to increase something else, maybe, but I think we're years away from knowing.
And I don't think it'll be that big a hiccup because you can still do the deferred before.
Yeah, which I
So
think
you're
more
still
people
gonna
will
have-
do that, and
Right.
so that is going to offset.
Because there's a little bit of a safety net that's
Yeah,
been in place for a while, and so when you remove it,
It'll
the
shift
hope would be
things.
that it would shift that behavior to opt in to defer before the
There's
expiration.
probably gonna be brokers paying the deferment fee the day after they renew the first time. Yeah, just for the next time they come up. Just go ahead and pay it.
But that's the, you know, there'll be that messaging component, right?
Mhm.
Of this is a change and you've gotta be proactive if you know.
I mean, and we can start with, what's the difference between dues and fees? Start from the beginning.
Especially if you have agents renewing in December and January or something. Well, I paid my dues.
Right,
It
well,
wasn't your
we're
fees.
different.
I would like the proposed rule written up and sent to everybody to kind of digest, and we'll have to propose it in November. I'm sure we'll get a couple comments, and maybe comments to tweak it good or accept it or whatever. They won't be adopted till February.
Right.
All right? So I'm good for getting some language.
Are there
Just
any other?
with the proposed, change, just make sure you document the financial impact that happened.
Have we received the information we need to receive? Yeah. Tony?
Do we want clarification on, we want it across the board?
So, do you want it for sales agents, for brokers, for inspectors? I'll tell you my unsolicited opinion is that if you do it for one, for consistency's sake, it doesn't make any sense to do it,
I
to
agree.
not do it for
I mean,
everybody.
either do it or don't do it. You know?
Right,
Yeah.
it's kind of a principle.
I didn't know that was a choice.
So what are we gaining from it other than 1,500 less people or that amount going down? Well, what, if we were to pro forma the change, we already know the financial implications, but the behavior wise, what is that gonna do to the renewal rate or the recertification rate? What does that look like?
I think what you're avoiding is unlicensed activity. So you're kind of putting your foot down on unlicensed activity, which has a consumer protection component to it. And I think you're also kind of removing this, I called it a vouch, this vouch system that makes, I think it probably makes some liars out of people.
The
Just
checkbox deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
don't
it
think that makes
cleans up kind of the intention of our rules.
So if you look at it, and I'm trying to quantify in terms of people, right? But people that go into within the 60-day range, and then you have the 6-month range, right? And currently, the process is the broker can come in and vouch for whoever, during that interim, right? Potentially, I mean, and 1,500 out of, and I'm kind of like with him, but just trying to 1,500 people out of 230-some thousand doesn't seem like a lot, right? And so, is it really a problem? And I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Let's see what we can find on.
Business, yes.
It upgrades our profession if we do it and makes our people, realtors, real
More
estate agents, accountable. It makes them responsible. Grow up, folks.
I
But if it's
identified,
not that, it'd be something else. You got 230,000 people.
Probably.
You're gonna have,
I'm surprised it's only 1,500.
yeah, well, soon.
Based on-
Well,
No.
yeah.
Well, and the
That's what
1,500
1500
is how many agents paid the deferral fee and renewed late. So that doesn't include brokers, which adds another about 800 a year of brokers who take advantage of the current process. So about 2,400 annually of total license holders. The impact on inspectors is not it's negligible because inspectors just generally do not renew late. They are a timely bunch. There are processes, they really are, their behavior for their license.
You would think
renewal.
realtors that deal with option periods and things all the time would be timely too, but, you know, apparently not.
They're not
How many
timely
of
on that
those-
either.
Well, that's a different, yeah, that's true. But, you know, I would just say that, you know, I think you could make the argument, you know, well, you know, it's 1,500, you know, what's the big deal? On the other hand, I would say, I think the message to the practitioners are, hey, you know, I mean, we're not your mother or your father, or although we feel like it and we act that way a lot, but I mean, you know, you need to be responsible. Now, like for other, I don't know the answers, but like lawyers, CPAs, I mean, how is that handled? I don't know.
It's similar. I know that they don't drop you on the day after your expiration. They give you, I think, 10 days, and then you get a letter, and that process goes through. I've never been there. Like I said, I always renew either on the day of or the day before. And that means that the week of my expiration, I'm doing all my continuing education classes. And I get, you know, but it's like I mean, we're busy, we get, you know, and so I set up my days to do continuing education, get my certification in, and enter my fees, and 5 days later, I get my license.
Yeah, and see, the thing of it is that I would also venture to guess that it's the same people that continue to have these problems, you know, every 2 years, you know, it's like about 3%.
It's the same ones whose mother woke them up in high school.
Well, that's right.
I know that with CPAs, something happens at the 3-month mark.
Yeah.
And I think those are enforcement actions, and they actually come out in the state board publication of CP enforcement actions. So your name comes out as, maybe as something, I don't know if you all have a similar publication where you say, hey, this person did not renew his license. And you don't want to see your name there. And you don't want to see your name there, and that's.
I don't think the people that don't renew or some of these.
They may not even read it.
I think the biggest thing from a broker standpoint is, I think the box is a problem. It's,
Well, that's the only thing.
you know, because, you know, puts you, I mean, realistically, if you don't even know they renewed or not renewed, you know, you're going back retrospectively and saying, oh yeah, I was supervising. Well, you know, probably not, because you probably didn't even know it was expired.
What's a little interesting and unusual about brokers and realtors is that you have a relationship where the broker is supervising the agent, and you kind of have a shared responsibility as far as, you know, rules and things that need to be done, right? And so, do you put the onus on the broker or on the agent or both? If so, and so it kind of complicates things a little bit.
Well, it does, and see, that's the part, I guess, as the broker, you know, in this case, I'm kind of like in the camp that says, hey, you know, my 1,200 folks, or where the hell it is today, you know.
And you know them all by name?
No, I don't. I know, but I'm just saying, I think that if they can't keep up with their dates and you know, having them be expired, I mean, having the new process in place would be a benefit.
Protects you.
Protects us, you know, from that standpoint. So I guess that's more the angle I'm coming at, is that, you know, since, you know, finding these people and all that, because of the remote nature of how people work today and that sort of thing, I'd rather it be a hard stop, and then they've got to do something then to get reenacted, you know.
And this rule change on the surface appears to benefit brokers in that way.
Right, yeah,
And the
exactly.
consumer.
And
And the consumer, yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean, because, you know, this is, you know, anecdotal, of course, but of the people, well, we've all got stories of really good people that just can't get this right. In the main, you know, the people that can't get this right don't get a lot of other things right. And, you know, and so.
Let's just make sure we dollarize the decision. I mean,
No, I agree.
I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, the reason why we're able to bring quality people in because we have the funds to do that.
But at the end of the day, our mission is to protect the consumer and it's not about the money.
I agree with, I think we're protecting the consumer right now. I mean, it's.
Not really.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're in the trenches,
Yeah, if you're in it, it's a
trenches,
different story.
you know, there's a lot of sloshing around that.
Yeah, that's for the 1,500 people that attack it.
No, I'm talking about the 230,000 people.
Yeah.
Oh, the 30,000.
Yeah.
No, 230. I'm saying, what I'm saying is, I mean, the comment of we're protected, yeah, we are, but the level of practice overall,
It's not great.
it
I
needs
get
to
it,
come
I
up.
just say we need to dollarize it and go from there.
Yes.
And of the 1,500, I'm protecting my agent that's doing a transaction with them.
I agree.
That, yeah, so.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I just say we need to dollarize the decision, that's it.
And I totally agree with that, but, you know, and as well, the, you know, the other thing is we hear in budget meetings, well, we gotta spend this reserve down, or,
Yeah.
you know, so which way is it? You know, because, and I'm like, well, if we need to spend the reserve down, to me, this is a good investment, right? But on the other hand, we don't know what the impact's gonna be, but we will, so, you know.
Especially when you see the trend line of numbers going like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're making up more
Up,
fees.
up, up, and it's just going up now.
It won't forever, so we need to be ready
Trust
for
me.
when it doesn't.
Trust me, that
But
is not to the benefit of the consumer.
No, it's not at
That's
all.
correct.
I did kind of back of the napkin math to determine that our license holder count has gone up twice as fast as the Texas population over the same period as the last census, so between 2010 and 2020.
And you see that by the applicants that are coming on and, you know, a lot of denials for criminal records, right?
20%.
You see that and
If you listen and look at what people write online, or if you listen to what people are saying, people think this is an easy profession to get into. It's a low dollar amount to get yourself in. They think that they're gonna be successful in 5 minutes and make all this money, and that there's no rules or oversight. And people just come in and come in and come in just because of that.
But there's 20% that don't renew, roughly, is that what?
Because they're not making the money they thought they were gonna make.
Yeah, the renewal rate for sales agents is somewhere between 75 to 80% historically.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, those are all very interesting things, you know?
All right, are we good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Will we see the proposed rule? We'll see it in October? I mean, in November?
See you in November.
All right.
All right, one second.
Denise, thanks for putting this together and putting up with
Yeah,
our ranting.
it's a thorny,
Yeah, it
it's
should,
a thorny.
but let me get it.
Well, and what I kept saying when we were having our internal discussions is this is not a simple thing to wrap your head around, and
Right.
even I can start to conflate the CE deferral process with the late renewal process, so they're all intertwined and related, so it's not easy to keep track of, but I'm glad you guys understood what we were presenting.
Yeah, the one, you know, sadly, the one thing that the residential realtors most relate to is paying their MLS fees. And they conflate, I mean, the one thing that they, because immediately, if it gets shut, because MLS, they shut you down.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
And so you're out, you're out of business,
you're out.
Yeah.
you know, but so they do pay attention to that.
They do.
I did.
All right. Next up, we're gonna talk about the legislative, Tony's gonna talk about the 88th legislative session, and if there's something in there that would move that 6 months to 45 days, it would be awesome.
Good morning, everybody. I'm gonna give as I talked about yesterday, legislative session is on its way. And so we wanted to just give all of you an update on where we are on our legislative initiatives that we talked about at the last workshop. What's that?
I'm sorry, I'm looking at where Chelsea is.
Oh, this is just me.
Yeah,
It's just
did
me.
I,
Oh.
do you not have the?
I think
dates?
I think I do. Hers looked different, so I had them on up here.
You're good.
Sorry,
Okay.
I'm
It didn't-
sorry.
it didn't look like you pulled up the date, so.
Well, I concur, so
I don't have the right one open is what you're telling me.
Yes.
Okay, great. 1 second, everybody.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I can read them off. That's the only,
It'll just be 1 second.
okay, sorry.
I'm sorry. I am not,
Did I
I
send you the
I
wrong
bragged
slide?
I was IT yesterday and I am too.
Well, there you go.
Did I send you
That's-
the-
this
did I
is
send
my
you the-
fault.
Did I send you the wrong slide, Vanessa?
No. Just the notes.
That's
Send it to humans and
No, I got it. Don't worry.
everyone start talking to Vanessa.
I know.
Oh, yeah. Someone was also typing the phone.
Oh, you didn't. I've got whatever's in their workshop right here. This is it. I think the actual problem was my sharing.
Okay, well, Vanessa's doing this. I'm gonna talk on most of these. There will be a slide that Chelsea talks about, another one that Summer talks about. Likely be some interruptions with people who may want to weigh in on something that I either missed or have a little bit more information on, so.
And ask questions along the way.
Yes, please do, and I'm happy, we are happy to go into any detail that you want to on this. But, so the first slide we're gonna pull up is on, these are just some very, these are some big high-level dates that I just want to talk about briefly. So early filing date, which is Monday, November 14th, that's the first day the bills can be filed. You want to try to get your bill in around that time, or at least as close to that time as possible. That gives it a better chance of going forward. That doesn't mean bills filed after that will have an issue, but this is the earliest date. The next date is a regular session. It begins on January 10th. Committee assignments, that's a little bit of a squishy date. Usually they're mid to late February, and committees don't meet until the assignments have been made. So once the assignments are made, that's when the work starts. They'll start having committee meetings scheduled, and the committees will start working through the bills at that point. 6-day filing deadline is the last day that bills can be filed. There's usually a big push at that date. Thousands of bills are usually filed around that time. There are some bills filed after that, but it's rare. And then sine die, which is what they call the end of the regular session, is Monday, May 29th, which is Memorial Day, I believe. It's always Memorial Day, I think. So those are just some dates for you. So the next two items, there's some items on this list that were filed last session that did not make it through the session. Not necessarily because of the subject matter, but just because last session was very strange. If you recall, it was a COVID session. We were told, all agencies were told early on, we just want to deal with important matters. So put the brakes on things that aren't super important. So because of that, a lot of things didn't get calendared, didn't get scheduled, they didn't make it through the process. So there's 3 or 4 bills that we had going through that did not make it through the process because of that. The first 2 are these inspector-related bills. There's one bill, again, I'm happy to talk about any details or questions you have on this, but there's 2 inspector-related bills. One is on the inspector recovery fund. That's a fund that's similar to the real estate recovery fund. This is underutilized because inspectors are required to carry liability insurance. So that is the way most inspector clients get made whole, is through liability insurance. We haven't paid a claim on this fund since 2017. So the thought is that it should be repealed, and there's a process and a bill in place to deal with that, to phase that out. The next bill, inspector-related bill, is to get rid of, eliminate the middle tier inspector license. That's actually called the real estate inspector license. 4% of all applicants apply for that on a regular basis. It complicates the licensing process. It complicates a lot of things. It's not utilized by very many. We would maintain that license type for those people who currently have it, but any new applications would, if this bill were to go through, we would cease taking any new applications. Happy to answer any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Well, I guess going back to the recovery fund, so there's a fund there, but it's not been utilized. Is that the
There's a couple of reasons for that. One is the liability, the inspector is required to carry liability insurance. Second is the claim amount is $12,500. So it's a minimum, it's low, and a lot of attorneys won't even go after that amount. So that's another reason. And routinely, every year, we end up hitting the cap by which we need to pull money out of it and dump it into GR, send it to GR. So we always go over that cap amount with the inspector recovery fund. So it's sitting there. It can be utilized, it's just not utilized. And as I said, we haven't had claims.
So it's not really big enough to be a attractive option for
Yes,
people
sir.
that have.
Insurance is much easier. You file a claim on their insurance and it gets paid for that. Yes, ma'am.
Isn't there something about the commission doesn't get to use those funds, it has to be paid to the state?
If it,
And that was one reason I had heard that we weren't pushing it. in some
well, when
direction.
it goes, when the fund balance goes over a certain amount,
600,000.
we are obligated to scrape the excess and give it to the state just to the general revenue fund, which means it can be used for anything. So it doesn't make sense to collect this money for a license and then, eventually it just kind of gets scraped off, because it isn't utilized.
And you can use it for
It's obsolete.
operational capital at all?
No, it goes to the state, not to
I'm
the
talking about the excess, before you get to the excess.
No,
No, it's dedicated to this. We have been in contact with the legislative office who does, there's some initial interest in carrying both of these. On the House side, we haven't reached out to the Senate side yet. We're planning on doing that, but the industry is fine with both of these bills going forward. And this is something that we have worked on as an agency for several sessions. And now just, thinking about bringing it back.
So that fee gets collected as part of the review?
It's part of the initial applications,
Initial?
not renewals, though, correct?
Correct.
And it's $5 or $10?
Oh, goodness.
It's okay. It's a minimal amount, and the amount that we
Yeah,
sweep to
that sounds
GR
good.
is roughly around
That sounds
$30,000, $40,000 every year. It's not a significant amount, and the cap is only $600,000 compared to the $3.5 million for the real estate recovery fund. But as Chelsea said, we collect it, and then we end up sweeping it because the fund is underutilized.
So back to John's question, I guess that if they were to repeal that, it goes to the state.
Well, there's a process in place in the bill by which we would set aside an amount to pay any claims, should there be any claims on it, a certain amount. Then we would also return some of those funds to currently licensed inspectors that paid into the fund, that's in the bill as well. And then anything left over would go to the general revenue fund at that point.
So there's a payout.
And I don't recall if that's in the bill or not, but I think there is a possibility of offsetting our what we pay to GR anyway on an annual basis based on that money. I don't remember if that was part of it or not. So, currently we pay, $750,000
called a ransom.
annually to GR to be an SDSI agency.
Right.
And there was a provision to offset it. I don't recall if that made it through the final version of the bill or not, so.
Tony, what's the biggest difference just between the mid-level real estate inspector and the professional real estate inspector?
So the professional inspector can sponsor both real estate and apprentices.
Okay.
The real estate inspector doesn't have to be, so a professional inspector doesn't have to be supervised at all. A real estate inspector has to be supervised, but it's not direct, it's indirect supervision.
Okay.
They can supervise apprentices, but it's not a direct, the real estate can, but it's not a direct tie. The
So the
professional is still
professional
in
one's
charge.
kind of like the broker?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
gotcha.
Yes, ma'am. And
But
there
an
are,
inspector can work for several different professional real estate inspectors, correct?
no,
No,
they're
it's a
only, it's a
one-to-one.
one-to-one
It's a
relationship.
one-on-one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, same thing with the apprentices. And the apprentice license would be maintained, so you could still go through the traditional pathway, but most people go through what we call the substitute experience pathway, which is just education
Right.
to get their license, and they can go straight to the professional to do that. So they bypass that middle tier because they don't need it.
Okay, so how do these inspectors these days, and this is probably something different, kind of work for different people, like they're contracted, it seems like?
Well, if they're
They're
professional,
Yeah, professional
Inspectors,
inspectors
They
can
can
do
do
that.
any,
Yes,
okay.
because they're like the broker.
So for the most part, there now will only be apprentice and professional, so they
If
can
this
be
bill
within that,
yes,
okay.
If this bill were to pass, yes, ma'am. Okay. Any other questions? All right, moving on to the next slide is the real estate recovery trust account. So this is the item where the, dealing with the statutory caps for the for the real estate recovery fund. The statutory amounts, if you recall from the last workshop, haven't increased since 1991. And there may be need to account for inflation and also to address increasing claims costs since that time. There are essentially three components to those amounts. There's the cost per claim cap, there's the cost per licensee cap, license holder cap, and then there's the overall fund cap. And Commissioner Woodruff suggested last workshop that we look at possibly doing a CPI calculation, consumer price index calculation, to get some baselines, and we have done that. And so looking at that from 91 to the most recent amount, which I believe was June of this year, and rounding up to account, to give some room based on that, it would increase the total cap on the fund from 3.5 million to 8 million. The per claim amount from 50,000 per claim to 150,000, and the per license holder cap from 100,000 to 250,000. So that would be the recommended based on, again, the CPI adjustment, as well as just padding and rounding up and padding a little bit to provide some room, adjusting those amounts, the fund amounts to that, if you want to.
So yesterday you mentioned that we were at 3.5
Yeah.
already.
We're at 3.5 now.
So that means if new claims came in, we couldn't pay them out, or?
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
We need claims to come in,
Yeah,
or else we
that's
sweep
the
it to
amount we
general
have
revenue.
in our bank account to pay out claims.
Once you go over 3.5, it goes to general.
These are, yeah, I'm sorry, let me explain. These are
Okay.
statutory caps. So there's a 3.5 statutory cap that we have to maintain. You go over that.
It's like the other one that we talked about.
Right, if you go over that, it's swept and goes to GR. If you go under that amount, or if there's an amount where there's another amount.
1.75.
1.75 million, if you go under that amount, then you have to assess the license holders to get back up to that 1.75.
Gotcha. You're on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is to adjust all of those based on that's consumer price index inflation calculation.
Tony,
And also to
just
give some-
simple math to make things easier. Currently, it's 50,000 per transaction, 100,000 per licensee.
Yes, sir.
So if we do per transaction from 50 to 150, I don't know why we don't do per licensee from 100 to 300. If we're tripling per claim, you should triple. And I'm thinking of the Ashley Williams specifically.
Yes, sir.
That was over $400,000. Now it's supposedly 600, 700, 800,000, and we were capped at 100,000. I would like to see the aggregate triple, just like we did the per transaction.
Okay.
So instead of 250 to 300,000.
These amounts were just thrown
Yeah.
out for conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great.
obviously, you know.
In general, how many claims do you get per year?
Saw a handful this commission meeting.
I want to say Amber would know best, but I want to say maybe 10. And Amber, if I'm wrong about that, you can chime in, but I want to say maybe 10, 15, something like
And are
that.
those usually settled within the year they're submitted?
It depends. So if we reach a settlement, that's usually handled relatively quickly, depending on how quickly they get documentation to us. If we decide this is not a payable claim and they want to take it to hearing, then that can obviously push the time out.
But these people have already gone through possibly 3 to 5 years of lawsuits.
Through litigation, yeah.
And as the one you were just mentioning, it doesn't pay a drop in the bucket for all the money that's already been expended by the consumers, right?
I think we have some data on how many times the limit has been reached, and I can't remember exactly what that is. I think we had some data from the past 10 years about how often that cap was implicated.
Based on it, as few that we have paid out per year in the years that I've been on the commission, I think 8 million is too much. What I don't want you to have to raise the dues for every agent and broker. I think that creates a big stink within the industry, and there's no reason for it. If there was a reason for it, okay, but I don't think it has to be 8 million.
Maybe it could be lower. Now, this is an amount that is paid only by new license holders. I'm looking at you, Denise, just to make sure that's accurate. There's no, at renewal, we don't keep paying into it, right? Okay.
Initial
So
applications.
And it's about $10. I wonder what would happen if we had a time period to get up to that 8 million. So you
Step into it.
Yeah. Or a lower amount.
Yeah, in order to assess, it's not, you don't have to be at 8 million to assess, it's that 1.7, so we might want to look at adjusting that as well, because if you're paying out more, there may be a higher risk of hitting that 1.7.
Yeah.
So that may be another amount, and I apologize for not contemplating that we might want to raise that threshold, so as to, if you're raising these just to account for that, then then you're not having to assess the license holders to get to that minimum.
Right. What may be helpful to kind of analyze the big picture is go back maybe 7 years and do a schedule where you have the beginning balance, earnings on interest or whatever, and then claims paid and then ending balance, and then come back around and do that for the past 5 years.
Okay.
And then at the bottom, put the number of claims paid out. So we can see an average of, we see a big number, it could be one claim, it could be, however many, and kind of schedule that, and then we can get a big picture as to what, I know Renata's.
She's talking to you from behind.
Yeah, Renata's.
We have that information, sorry.
Yeah.
It's available in the staff report, along with the chart that shows how many claims are paid out each year.
Is it, do you have it by year, how many years
Yes,
back?
sir. It goes back.
And I'm fine with
2012.
lowering the floor. My biggest thing is when you have a large claim, there needs to be enough money to make, like, we had one where there was like 4 people and we only had 100,000. So we had to kind of divvy up among the 4.
That was Williams, wasn't it?
No, well, Williams, we had 4, but this one was, there's another one where, and we kind of divvied up, and it's first come, first serve if they don't file it, so.
How does the award, is there a committee or a person that determines, okay, this?
We do as a board, the staff works it up. and
I'm
brings it
sitting
to
in
us.
Formula.
I'm sitting in the,
Ask about.
in the commission, and I'm looking at the 3 items that we approved, and there's no amounts, no determination, background. I mean, maybe it was supplemental information that we got.
I asked.
Yeah.
There's a formula they used.
Yeah, there was, and with what Vanessa sent us, confidential, like a couple days before,
Okay,
there was a summary of each case.
okay, that's what.
And we can always give you more information. I mean, that's one of the things we've been working on in the last couple of years is providing more information on these recovery fund claims so that you all know what you're approving.
Yeah.
The calculation process, so, you'll have a judgment that's from a court. And then Amber, I'm gonna really succinctly go through it, but Amber will get everything she needs by statute, including, the amounts that are order paid. Then she'll run her calculations with what we can pay by statute. She'll offset it with, if other amounts have been paid by other folks, et cetera. And then she'll come up with that calculation. She'll work with Abby and myself on any sort of strange issues that come up. We take a look at it. And we say, yep, that looks good. This looks like it fits everything. And then we provide you with those summaries and the amounts. So it's a pretty detailed process. Amber's the true specialist on it. She's the owner of it. And then we work with her just to, double check finances part.
Are y'all always looking forward as to, okay, this is, what we have available, and this is what we can pay based on, the balance, the required minimum balances and so forth?
So we're always gonna start, yes, I think we're always aware of since it hasn't been an issue of, we're not close to being at a place where we don't have the money. Right, I can't remember the number you gave us yesterday, we're at 3.5 right now. What we are really looking at on these individual cases are the caps. So the license holder cap is 100,000 and the transactions is 50,000. So that's where we're looking at, and we're never trying to save money with this, right? Because this is a fund that is intended to make people who have been wronged whole. And so if they can give us the documentation showing that they meet all these requirements, then we're, going to make that recommendation. That's not to say, I think actually probably in the last couple of years, we've had some of the more difficult and strange ones, and so we will go back and forth with them. We will appeal certain things, like we'll get in there to the extent we think it's not meeting those statutory requirements, the case itself. But we always have that mind towards that, you know, depending on which one's applicable here, the 50 cap or the 100 cap. With the hope of making these folks whole if they meet those requirements, because that's the intent of the statute.
And so where does 8 million come from? Just a block from Maritime?
No, if you adjust if you do the CPI
It's a
adjustment,
CPI.
it got to 7 and some change.
Yeah.
And what we did with this 8 million, 150, 250 is just round up in each case, just really to get a little bit of a buffer for the future. So, but that was so that we could get to a number. If you want the number to be different, then great.
This was literally to get just a talking baseline in terms of some numbers out there.
Yeah.
In terms of what, you know, it's up to you guys what you want to.
The 3.5 million is 35 full claims, and the 8 million would be 32 full claims. So, yeah, pretty.
I would be sure you include something about it can't be retroactive, so that the people that were still wrong in the previous cases couldn't come back.
That's typically how legislated, it's usually after a certain date. The current law applies to something after the date the law goes into effect, and then after that date.
Right, but having that language
We can
is-
make sure it does that, yes.
And I think, you know, we can look at that total. If I had to guess, I might be speaking for you, Tony, but the 3.5 to 8, I think is one that we've really been focused more on the 50 to
Right, and
those individual caps, but with some contemplation on the total cap. And we probably, you know, get with Renata, like really look at the history of where those amounts have been.
And I do think we do need to look at and see if we do need to adjust the floor to make sure that that's not something that we are gonna hit if we raise the claim amount that sooner. So then we have to assess the license holders.
Yeah,
that kind of
it's gonna take a little bit of effort as far as trying to pro forma for your claims. I'm wondering from a historical claim, you know, we're paying out maximum amounts, but the requests, were they more than the minimum, the maximum amount and those types? And so the probability or the chances that we're gonna have somebody request, you know, a $150,000 dollar claim, you kind of want to see where the claims are coming in, right? We know we can pay the maximums, but what's the likelihood of us having increased claims?
So I think we have the data on the amount, well, I know we have the data on the amounts that have been claimed and where they would fall on either under or over those thresholds. You may also see though an uptick in claims if you raise those amounts and it becomes a little bit, you know, more worth it to pursue it, because it's a process. I mean, it's not cheap, right, to go through the entire legal process and then just to get here. And so you may see an uptick there because it becomes a more, you know, beneficial path to being made whole, which is great. I mean, that's not a bad thing, right? But I know we've got the historical data on what those claims have been and how many have fallen under and over. We'd have to do it, but I know we've got it.
To get to I know there are 3 things that a consumer has to meet to get to the recovery fund. And I can't remember what they all are, but does the real estate agent involved have to declare bankruptcy, or they have to have a judgment?
There has to be a final, so there's 3 things, you're right, there's the final judgment, there has to be an abstract filed, and there has to be a writ returned nolla bona. So that is kind of, I think, what you may be thinking of, and that basically means that they have searched for funds to try to cover this judgment, and the constable or the sheriff has come up empty-handed. So that helps to guarantee that our fund is truly a fund of last resort, that they've pursued all other avenues before coming to us.
I was just thinking that there's a lawsuit that has been in the last 3 legal classes, that Lalo versus, and obviously they were rich people that got mad at each other. And so I thought, they're not gonna have a chance to get to the recovery fund, are they?
And then if there is money paid, it is filed with the Attorney General or whatever for later collections if possible.
Yeah, we do
Right.
we
Yeah.
do work with the Attorney General.
And a license holder can't get an active license
Right.
until they pay that back.
So they pay.
Right.
Have we ever had anybody pay it back?
Oh, I doubt it.
It gets, sometimes,
It's been a few.
it gets tough after a little bit of time because of the way that the interest calculates.
Okay.
We're getting
But it means-
inquiries once a year.
I think we're good with this, maybe tweak some numbers as far as
We'll look at all
Yeah.
the things
in the
that,
floor.
Yeah,
As you're
you
paying
have to come
attention.
up with almost an actuarial computation as to what you think you're gonna pay out. It's
we'll
like
get
an
the
insurance.
insurance burn on that and try to work
Yeah.
up something so we can get something that's a little bit more.
Your questions will inform how we move forward in terms of making sure we can explain it and
Right.
it's justifiable. We'll keep you posted.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yes, ma'am. Moving to the next slide. This is what we call the 1101 occupations cleanup bill. These are just items we identified to be on this. That doesn't mean any of these other items can't at some point be put on what we call a cleanup bill. But the three items that are mentioned on here, the first is to remove language left in the statute that establishes licensing requirements for non-residents. That removal would conform with the sunset recommendation / legislation that removed residency requirements for licensure for TREC. If you recall, for our sunset, they did not want to have residency requirements. Or there's still some language left in the statute that talks about non-residence requirements. So that would eliminate those to conform with that. The next item is what we call the Unauthorized Practice of Law. The statute currently authorizes a license holder to use contracts drafted by a property owner or an attorney if directed by the property owner. The use of property owner in the statute disregards buyers and tenants. So the recommendation would be to replace that term with property owner, or property owner with principal to correct this and be inclusive of all those parties. So that would just be, so again, remove or replace property owner with principal. And the final item is regarding study guides. So there's a requirement in the statute that the agency publish and update study guides for the licensing exam. This came to light earlier this year on the board side. This language is part of both the board and TREC's statute. The language was initially in the board's statute from long ago because they used to write the licensing exam, and so that made sense. We can't remember the last time we published a study guide on the board side, even though it was something that was tied to something they did previously. On the TREC side, it was added. We're not really sure why. We think it was as a possible revenue generator, but we're not sure about that, but we think that might be one of the reasons it was added. The reality is that providers are better able to do this, and there are test prep courses already out there for people studying to take the exam. And so the thought is we just remove this requirement and leave it up to the providers to do what they're currently doing to help applicants.
Tony, I've got, the seller can provide a contract or his attorney. And we use a lot of those in El Paso. It's called a builder. The builder has their own contract. If we add buyers and tenants can provide a contract, I think it's gonna put a license holder in a huge issue if that buyer decides to get something off the internet and say, this is a contract I want to use. Where the builder's contracts, they normally have attorneys do it, they have the disclosures, and this is saying any Tom, Dick, or Harry buyer can provide a contract and I'm authorized to use it, and that scares me. And I know the buyer's always been left out. I think that's the reason being, so builders can have their own contracts 98% of the time. That scares me to say that as a license holder, I can get a buyer supplied contract and fill in the blanks. Because once that happens, there's gotta be another attorney involved. And I'm just looking at it from the practicing standpoint. Mark, Jan, I mean, Leslie, y'all.
I hadn't thought about that to extend it, but it's a great point.
Yeah, and I don't know if we want to open that can of worms from a license holder's perspective. Does that make sense? I mean,
It does open a
Abby?
can of worms, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So, our initial thought, and this is something that came out of that Unauthorized Practice of Law working group of, why is the statute limited to just property owners? And that may be the background, is that was, originally who that exception was for. Right now, principals can contract how they want to, and the only thing that the statute really touches on, it doesn't inhibit that or stop that. But it just says, well, license holders, you can help a seller or a landlord if they want to use their own contract or if they have an attorney that's drafted a contract. But it leaves out if a buyer has their own contract or a tenant would have their own, that's probably less likely, but it just leaves them out. So the thought in the working group was, would it make more sense to be more even-handed so license holders could be involved in both of those situations as opposed to just one? Again, it doesn't stop a buyer from using their own contract, it just
Keeps us from
keeps you, right,
filling in the blank.
right.
And with the builder, when they're doing 400 houses, you're a little bit familiar, and they're a little bit familiar with what needs to be in there to protect everybody. John Doe buyer is gonna get something off LegalZoom or whatever, and it might not cover everything that needs to be covered in Texas. And that's why I thought it was always funny, but I understand why. It scares me that if a buyer brings us a contract, we can now use it.
Or you can say, advise your client against it. You can use this or whatever.
It's gotta be presented no matter what, but
Or you can refuse, say, you need a TREC contract. Let me help you with that.
we really can't. If that goes into effect, we can't say that. We have to present all contracts that are brought to us.
If a seller produces an internet-ready contract, right, and your buyer wants, you're representing the buyer, and you're advising your client buyer, then you can tell your client buyer, if you want to buy this property, have them give you.
I can probably jump in a little bit. So principals, buyers, sellers, they can use whatever contract they want. All this would touch on would be whether a license holder can be involved in some of those situations and use those contract forms that are generated by a buyer or a tenant. So it's ultimately up to the parties to decide, what contract they want to use. If they want to use a TREC contract, great. If they don't,
Or a napkin.
Sure, they can use a napkin. But this would just address the situation that currently the statute only says, okay, license holders, you can also use contracts prepared by a property owner or prepared by an attorney and required by a property owner. The switch here would just change property owner to principal so that a license holder could be involved in the transactions that if a buyer provided a contract or a buyer's attorney provided the contract. But it doesn't stop. Principals are still going to be able to contract however they want to and use whatever contracts they want to. Again, the idea was just, how to address the license holder's involvement in that process.
So the license holders cannot.
But license holders wouldn't be dictating which contract to use. Often the parties are turning to them for guidance about, what contract to use, but they're not the ones determining yes or no, you can use this contract. It's ultimately would be up to the principals to make that decision.
And I think this was put in statute or the occupations code just because so many builders were using their own contracts and we didn't have permission to help with those. And so they put this in, if the owner, builder, HUD, FHA, VA, if they have their own forms, you're allowed to help with the transaction or use that form. And I see us changing the rules for a very minute number, but it's gonna put the agent or license holder in a huge liability issue.
Well, and again, this was just a discussion point as part of that working group. This is not a critical issue, and obviously it's existed in statute for a long time. So I don't think it's a big deal.
We can, obviously, these are your initiatives.
Yeah.
We can remove it, so.
Let's take it out.
So they currently cannot use contracts drafted by a property owner.
No, the property owner, yes. not the purchaser.
Not the buyer.
And got the buyer. And just in our market, nearly 3,000 houses last year were new homes.
Sure.
And I guarantee you, every one of them had their own contract.
Sure.
None of them used the TREC, new home completely. But I just, it scares me as a practicing broker for somebody to walk in and say, prepared to own offer. The first thing I'm gonna do is, I can't fill that out. And I'm gonna probably advise your attorney, talk to their attorney, and,
But I always have to look at everything at the lowest common denominator, like what Scott would say, or one of us would say.
I
It
thought
would
it
be
was the
different.
most common denominator.
But it would be different than what a lot of people would say, because they don't know, and they just are green.
Yeah, but I see your point. That's some risk in there.
I think a lot of risk.
If anybody presents me with an attorney contract, offer, I'm gonna say to the other side, whoever the other side is, you need to seek your attorney in order to respond to this.
I am not an
Because-
attorney.
I am not an attorney, you've gotta see one.
But going back to what I just said, that's,
She's prudent
Yes.
and normal.
yes, exactly.
No, it's not normal, it's prudent.
So,
Yeah, that's true.
Scared.
so yeah,
Not normal.
there's I would say a larger number of people aren't that way.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is rethink this buyer and tenant addition.
Yes, please.
Okay,
All right, everything else though, the other two items are, okay.
On the study guide, do the education provider requirements currently require them to grow? So if we take that out, then there's no requirement at all for anybody to make, because I'd like to see them, I know they're doing it, but I'd like to see them continue to do it.
It's a money generator for them.
We produce,
Yeah, but
we get information from Pearson View that is exam topic pass rate information, so it breaks down like where people are doing well, where people are lacking in successfulness in the exam. And that's a tool that we encourage our education providers to use in preparing exam prep courses. And there are, I believe we did a poll about a year ago or so, but there are numerous providers who currently offer exam prep courses. There is no requirement, but
Which
they
is
are
a-
available.
that's a broader tool than specificity of a study guide.
Right.
That comes in a lot of different forms.
You're welcome.
All right, are we good to move on, or, all right,
Throw something at us and we'll certainly let you ask.
okay. Okay, next up is the broker education experience. So the broker responsibility working group currently recommends focusing on experience by reducing the current statutorily required semester hours to become a broker. This is actually something that the broker responsibility working group has been working on for some time. It was originally recommended several sessions ago, but it was put on hold because the agency at that time was focusing on sunset, so we shifted our focus. It was also put on hold last session because of the nature of that session, as I explained earlier. We were informed, don't bring anything up that's not imperative, so it's put on hold then. So this is being brought forward again. Current recommendation is to reduce the current education hours from 60 required in the statute to 42 by reducing the number of qualified course hours to 24. There are two statutory ways to do this. You can either change the number of hours in the statute itself, place numbers in there as it currently is, or you can change the language to provide the agency rulemaking authority to determine what those numbers are. So give the agency a little bit more leeway, likely in order to make sure that the license holders or trade associations or whoever in the legislature are not worried that the agency would go rogue. You can put a cap on that as well, just to provide some assurances on that. Language has been drafted for both options, but we just need some clarification as to which. Go ahead.
Well, I would throw out the rulemaking with the cap would also help us navigate the process, because the corresponding part of this is to increase the experience. And when you start increasing things, we get into a little bit more of a regulatory compliance zone, et cetera. So if we had the rulemaking with the cap, I think we could toggle it better, do it more simultaneously and see where we get versus just a direct statutory cut. And then if we run into some hurdles in the rulemaking process, in terms of increasing things, we're a little bit more stuck. So I like the rulemaking with the cap because I think the cap is important in terms of the agency's authority for license holders knowing, this is where that cap is. It's less agency, ability to, we wouldn't, but go wild, right? In terms of setting these things. So I think my legal thoughts on that are the rulemaking authority with the cap.
Helps us navigate.
Yeah, it really does. It gives us that room, but also,
The experience component is already rulemaking, right?
Right, that's right.
And then you don't also have to, if there is, say, down the road, 4 years down the road, whatever's established, if there is something that different established this session and there's a need to change, you don't have to go back to the legislature and ask again to establish those hours. You would have the ability to do the rulemaking process, which encourages people to get involved. It's not in a vacuum, the ability to navigate that as well.
So there's actually a lot more stakeholder input opportunity at the rulemaking level, but with that cap, I think you're keeping with the legislative and, guidance of having it in statute.
So is this for initial licensing or?
Yes, sir. It's for qualifying.
So when you say required semester hours to become your broker from 60, are those college hours or those?
8 hour is a 15 semester.
Yeah,
So yes, it
Yes.
is kind of a college,
It's a
it is a
trans-
college hour.
Yes, it's a college.
Yeah, it's not through college, but it's a college hour.
but our courses, there's a calculation they have where they take a semester hour and the course hours, right, factor in at a certain
So
rate.
2 semester hours equals a 30-hour qualifying course.
Each hour is
60
15
semester hours, right, is 900 total hours, which is the
But not
requirement,
in college.
right.
Right.
So when it says BRWG recommends focusing on experience by reducing, did you mean education hours or experience? Because to me, experience is actually working on transactions.
So focusing, and I apologize if this is confusing, but essentially it's focusing on experience because there's an experience component doing what Vanessa said, which is raising that and focusing on this as being as vital and lowering the education requirement. So balancing that out, but doing this. So the education hours be here raising experience requirements. That's essentially what happened. So I apologize if that
I
was
think
confusing.
the idea behind that, Ben, was everybody feels that the experience is more valuable than the education, just your hands-on stuff. So we were increasing the experience by a little and taking down the education so it's not a barrier.
Just
Gotcha.
one's in statute
That makes
and
sense.
one's in.
One's a rule, right.
Well, there's only 300 of the hours that are required qualifying courses. And I think that's where the broker responsibility group was chiming in also because the remaining, 600. So if you do your 270, which is your initial plus your SAE, and say you haven't taken the brokerage, so then that's, 300. So 600 hours could be accomplished through currently either a degree, 600. Or it's just, there's nothing meaningful about that additional 600 hours of education. And I think that's where the broker responsibility was looking for that balance.
And this has been a long time coming.
Right.
It just has not been the right session for too many sessions. So this is something that various forms of the broker responsibility working group have recommended. And it just hasn't, the timing has not been right to seek this. I think the time is right.
And each through their own analysis, right? I think that's really interesting, is you've had different groups, at different time periods coming up with mostly the exact same recommendation. And it's that experience education toggle.
Balance.
So is this something that, like, Texas Realtors would support?
So we do need to reach out to stakeholders and have those conversations, and those are currently being scheduled and working on that. So it's not just, but to answer your question, yes, they would be definitely would provide input, be interested.
We have a meeting with Texas Realtors later this month to basically walk through this list and to just do some coordinating, see what's tolerable, what's not. I don't expect anything on this list to be intolerable.
Probably not, that's kind of what I was.
But, and then the next question is, who kind of carries the weight?
Yeah,
And we
like
typically
legislature.
work pretty well together. I mean, we can't advocate, we can take a cleanup bill to the legislature and say, this is what would happen if you,
But they could take.
but they can, yeah. so-
I think what we need, right, an action item on this is which of the two options the commission would prefer, statutorily establishing the hours or moving with rulemaking authority for the agency.
Number two.
Me too. We don't know what option will be tolerable to the legislature.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's some, I mean, there's a chance that they would say, I don't trust the commission to decide that. I think it should be this. I doubt that'll happen, but I just want to throw it out
Now,
there.
who would be, I mean, assuming the industry, is lined up, for the bill, I wonder who would be opposed to that? What the opposition, where it come from?
Yeah, but if you get the stakeholders in a unified
Well, that's what I'm
voice
saying.
and they
Yeah,
hear
then
it
I don't know
from
who your
everybody,
opposition is.
Yeah.
I think you'd have a better chance of,
Correct.
they're gonna listen to the stakeholders
Well, that's what I'm saying, so if you get,
Usually.
One is the current, so the numbers are like specified in statute, that's the current method, right? So, a change from current always takes a little bit more. So, under number one, you would the change
Change a
would be
number.
across, it'd be a strike through of a number. Number two, you're granting more authority to the agency and you're putting in a cap, so it's a bigger change, just in terms of concepts of change. But I think, you're speaking to the point of stakeholder support, et cetera, then it's a little bit different, right?
Yeah.
But you gotta see, those are both sides. One is what currently exists, and that change would be pretty clean. So those are the considerations.
But by rule, we're putting a stopgap in there. Like when they increase education from 15, they said you go up to 21 and but you can't go up more than 3 hours every renewal cycle. So they couldn't go from 15 to 21. So that's your stopgap.
Right,
And that'll
That's
make
a-
it
yeah,
easier
it's a
for.
right. I like number two a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
just from the workings of rulemaking, all of that,
And it's
Because
not
we've
a,
been trying to get this in 3 sessions.
right.
So if it's statute, it might be 3 sessions before we can fix it.
And it's not unprecedented. We have the authority on the inspector's side to establish the hours. I mean, there's a statutory, this is the number of hours, but we have the authority to go in and to tweak and provide what those are.
Right.
Yes.
But given the fact that we've just gone through that sunset debacle that we had, and we've come out on the other side really, really good, they might be more inclined to perceive that the commission is being more public friendly.
Absolutely.
So that should help.
That's been 4 years.
Remember, it's a long time.
Good, it seems like they remember the bad a long time.
Yes, they do, but I do think that the attitudes have changed, because I think the legislature was surprised that it was addressed quickly and totally,
Yes,
so.
we have 3 more slides.
So the next slide is,
Texanium Real Estate Research Center fee collection. So you will likely remember last session, I want to say mid-February, I think it was actually while it was snowing and like 7 degrees in Austin. We discovered a discrepancy in our statute that was changed in 2015. That basically meant that we were over collecting fees that we passed to the Real Estate Research Center. And we believe that we were collecting what the legislature intended we collect, but that the statute was not written correctly. So we worked really hard to clean that up and to fix that, and it died in the last hours of session just because of politics. It wasn't anything related to the bill. We did find a partial fix in the interim, just by there's authority that allowed us to collect the fee as we think intended, but only for renewals, not for initial applicants. So we're basically wanting to go back and do this correction and clean up just like we tried last session, but to just make the Real Estate Research Center whole. There was no opposition to this last session. Everybody seems to be of the mind that we want to fully support the Real Estate Center because of the great service they provide. So this will just be a redo of that.
Okay.
Wholesaling.
That's me. Hi y'all, so as a reminder, wholesaling is a model where someone enters into a contract to purchase property and then sells their interest in that contract to a third party prior to closing. So a license is not necessary for this type of transaction as long as the wholesaler discloses to the buyer that they are entering this contract and what will happen and do not otherwise engage in real estate brokerage activity. So you may recall some of the comments from the survey that we got, but I just want to note some. So license holders who responded generally didn't love the practice of wholesaling, but they mentioned that sellers would often come to them after a wholesaling contract fell through, seeking help, and tended to be confused about the nature of their relationship with the wholesaler or what was happening in the transaction. And then sellers who sold their property to a wholesaler and had a negative experience tended to say they felt they were misled about the nature of the transaction, confused again about who that person is, if it was a real estate agent or what, and then also mentioned that sometimes the sale was never completed because they couldn't find an end buyer. And then we had the title company professional survey, and we also noted, which is interesting, just that sellers are often unaware they're selling their property to a wholesaler, and it's going to, well, no, set that back, unaware they are ultimately selling their property to someone besides the wholesaler, and that wholesaling contracts were more likely to cancel than other types of transactions. So this, along with subsequent feedback we've received after publishing those results, has made us think a step in the right direction will be to add a statutory requirement that wholesalers disclose to sellers the nature of the transaction. And so that is what we're proposing, and we're open to your thoughts on that.
How are you gonna enforce it?
I think there might be some other things maybe working on wholesaling, maybe, but this is an easy fix. It just disclose to all parties.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's gonna fix it, but at least the seller knows. Because I didn't know this until I was corrected by an attorney in here. If I buy property as Scott Kestner, I don't have to put our assigns. I can assign a contract. But this is basically just disclosing to them that I am wholesaling it, I will resell it or whatever. So I think it's an easy fix, and maybe there's more that can be done. But I think this is low hanging fruit. Now I say that it will never get out of committee, but this looks like low hanging fruit, and it protects the consumer.
Yeah, it seems like this is at least the most palatable option to people who are currently practicing wholesaling. That's not to say, as you said, there won't be other things that come up in a session, but this is perfect description, low hanging fruit to help consumers.
I guess the question would be, okay, if you're opposed to it, why is it a bad idea to have to disclose to all parties?
Correct.
I think we're told over and over again, disclose, 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 disclose.
And if you just a cursory going online and looking at wholesaling videos, I haven't ever seen anybody opposed to disclosing it.
Is disclosure, would it be in writing or verbal or what?
Or both, or it's, I believe the statute is currently, does it say in writing? I don't know.
I don't know if it does, but that's the only way to prove you've done
But
it.
we
Needs to
could
be
definitely
written.
strengthen that and require it in writing if we, when we're doing this as well.
I mean,
So here's my thought on this. This is low hanging fruit. It's a click towards protecting a consumer. We did this survey to determine what level of harm there seems to be to the consumer. I think there may be a collection of stakeholders who want to take this a whole lot farther. And I don't think that the commission has much, or that we have left room really for much of an opinion on that, other than, right, just from the consumer protection standpoint, what would protect the consumer. I don't think, based on the survey, it didn't seem as if we had enough data to say we need to license all wholesalers. But it wouldn't surprise me if this is where we're marching eventually.
Some of the states have already done that, right?
Yes,
Right,
that's
but,
exactly right.
but Texas is infamous for private property rights.
Right.
And as an owner, I should be able to do what I want to with my property,
That's right.
and so I think this,
It'll be real interesting to see kind of where the stakeholders fall on all this, but from a consumer, as a consumer protection agency, this seems like kind of a logical way to inform the legislature, if you will. That
So-
makes sense?
yeah, so from a I guess, definition standpoint, so, the wholesaler is entering into a contract, to buy the property, then sell it, now does it matter if they sell it before are they gonna close on it?
That's not a wholesaler,
That's not.
that's what we would
wholesaler,
define, it's the official term, that's a flipper.
yeah. Flipper, okay, that's what I thought. So this is,
Not to be confused with the dolphin.
and of course, I'm old enough to remember that, I'm old enough to remember Flipper. Yeah. But, so that's what I thought. So then really we're talking about, a situation where it isn't Scott who says, hey, I'm gonna buy it, and then,
I'm selling my equitable interest prior to closing.
Yeah.
Assigning it.
And that's a business model, so in some instances, that would be upon making an offer, or, just initially. I guess there are some, and this is kind of the private property rights, well, I don't even know if I could say that, but there are some likely who come to this decision later in the process or transaction, right? So they're equitable, and then they thought they wanted it.
yeah, that's probably not typically the case.
I think it's tiny.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I
think this is a business model.
right.
You do it once, it's, yes, life changed.
Yeah.
You do 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 transactions a year,
Probably.
then disclosure needs to be made. And this just,
I just wanted to mention too that, I highlighted those comments from the sellers, license holders, and title company. And this is in the article too on the website, but just to show the buyers, they had different negative experiences and different, positive feelings too than the sellers. So for instance, it was just more about transparency around how the transaction was happening, not necessarily who they were working with, but just like, well, what happens next? So I think that just shows that there is something to the disclosure. That doesn't mean it's going to be, the perfect thing for every single person, but that's true of any transaction.
But it is a step in the right direction.
Right.
So what would the disclosure be?
I would have to look at what the statute language is, I don't recall, but,
So
but,
What
amount?
is the disclosure?
it would
What-
the party,
It would
What do they
explain to
have
the
to
parties
say?
and what they're doing. Because one of the biggest complaints on the seller side is they're, this wholesaler is trying to make money off this transaction. So they're, unlike a licensed entity who is required to make sure they're providing the best offer, they don't have any obligation to do that. So you're selling to a wholesaler then turns around and sells it for more than you sold it for. And they're like, wait a minute, they didn't know they were selling it to somebody that could do that. That's the biggest complaint on the seller side. So the disclosure would, it would need to make them notice that that's what, the kind of what the issue is. So I'm not sure what the language in the statute says, but.
So if I were to buy a lot from Mark for $10,000, right, and I wholesale it to Michael for 20, right? Then my disclosure requirement to Mark would be, hey, I sold it.
No. It wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to, no, it would just be what your
intent.
That's what your intent
Oh,
is, that
the
you're wholesaling.
intention,
Because
not
what it is
necessarily details to it.
you're,
But that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing is, I offer to buy Mark's land for $10,000. And before we show up at the title company to close on that property, I sell my contract to Vanessa for $12,000. So ultimate buyer, seller, I'm like this in-between person and have made $2,000.
And all you have to disclose now is, I'm selling you this lot, it's an equitable interest, I don't own it, but I have the right to sell it. This would make her to disclose to Mark, I'm buying this
Buying this.
with the intent of possibly selling the equitable interest.
Yeah, I don't actually intend to buy this. I'm selling my
So it's-
contract to
So
her.
it's effectively a disclosure of intent to assign the.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's also, I'm doing this without a license.
Sometimes, yeah.
I'm
Most of the
acting
time.
as
Yeah.
a
Right, it's a contract
This weird-
assignment.
in-between principal.
And if you don't do the disclosure, then you're in a voluntary broker debt.
I get, and I'm just anecdotally, I get probably 10 calls a week from wholesalers for an investment property I have. But it's not obvious that they're wholesalers until you figure out who they are, and then you go Google them and you see what they do. But I'm pretty savvy. I mean, I would like to think in a lot of ways I'm not. But, so this happens a lot with properties that are not fancy looking, and you have sellers who are not sophisticated and don't know that they're losing part of their upside. That's sort of it.
So in a contract, if you have, that or, buyer and or assign, like you said,
Which is implied.
would that be disclosure?
No, because it's implied. I mean, just Texas contract law, you can always assign your contract. It's just part of, that's much bigger than real estate. That's just Texas contract law.
But assignment does not mean you're wholesaling. You might buy it as an individual, then close it for your corporations. And that's probably, we see more assignments like that, where we buy it as an individual but close it under a corporation or vice versa.
Right.
Yeah.
And not necessarily a
Wholesale
third
it.
party.
Right, exactly. Most assignments, I would say, are probably, it's the same entity, just a different, same person, different entity.
I just want to note in the interest of balance too about these comments, the sellers who have positive experiences with wholesalers say it kind of saved them from, having to make repairs to their property. Like it's in disrepair, or it's inherited, they don't want to deal with it, or they're gonna head into foreclosure and this is an opportunity for them to get out of that. So, as Scott mentioned, there's opportunity for all sorts of people to meet their needs, their individual business
Yeah,
needs,
so-
so.
And in addition to that, I can tell you too, because I've had clients come to me who've received these contracts from several of these people. And you look at the contracts and they're like, oh, it looks great and blah, blah, blah. And I just signed it and I'm like, did you know it said this, and whatever? And they could get out the day before you close and they're like, it doesn't say that. I'm like, right here. And they really have no clue what's going on.
Yeah, there is room for
Yeah.
predatory.
After Harvey, it was rampant.
Right.
in Houston.
Yeah.
Rampant. And it was like on the elderly and people that really didn't know any better.
So it seems like they serve a purpose. The question is just how far do you go in the regulation? So if the seller is eyes wide open, that's a step, right? Or, and by eyes wide open, meaning there's a
They know what's
disclosure.
going on.
Yeah.
They've been informed.
Yeah, I think the fact there's this much conversation about it suggest that probably disclosure is a good idea. You know, I mean, it's kind of like whenever we get into a discussion in a transaction, 100% of the time, I'll say, well, the fact that we've sat here and talked about this for the last whatever is a good enough reason for me
Instructive.
to disclose it. I mean, you know.
Sure. What does disclosure hurt?
It shouldn't hurt
It
anything.
should.
No, it
That's
shouldn't.
the key.
I would agree with
Speaking of disclosure, let's go to the next slide.
disclosure on the, that's the safest thing.
This is your last slide for today, so
I know.
thank you for bearing with me.
And this is not a.
This is not an initiative. This is something that came to us recently. Sorry to interrupt you, Chelsea, if you want to continue.
No, you were doing a great job. I interrupted you.
If you recall, last session, a bill was filed that would have excluded business entities from licensure as it was filed. As it moved through the process, it changed a bit, and it became, there were certain circumstances that needed to be met before a business entity was carved out of the requirement for licensure. And part of that was also having to register with the agency, and it gave us rulemaking authority to determine what that registration looked like. But if you can, as you can see on the slide, it would have applied to a business entity that receives compensation on behalf of a license holder that's earned by that license holder while engaged in real estate brokerage, performs no other acts as a broker, and is an LLC or an S corp. So the bill that we were contacted about recently is essentially this same bill. It starts from this point. It's not an overall exclusion from licensure. It says if you meet all these, you register with TREC, TREC determines what that looks like by rule, then you are exempt, the business entity would be exempt from licensure. We have not had a conversation internally about this because this came up right before the commission meetings. So we need to meet internally on this. We also have not talked in any major way to the sponsor who reached out, or the legislator who reached out to us about this, nor have we talked to any stakeholders about it. So this is still in its infancy. We're going to be talking about this in the next several weeks or so. And obviously we'll keep all of you informed on where that goes. But,
So in a nutshell, if I have ABC brokerage and Mark gets Mark Woodruff LLC and he advertises as Mark Woodruff Realtor or whatever, and he gets a commission and he has an LLC S corp filed with TREC, I can pay a commission to the LLC. Now that LLC cannot advertise, he can't do any real estate related activity. It's only for collecting compensation. And I think the biggest misunderstanding we have right now is LLCs. And I think it just adds confusion to it. I understand the way, but that's the way, I can only pay him a commission. He can't advertise the LLC, he can't put LLC on his cards, he can't do anything. That's just a place for me to pay compensation, correct? The way it's kind of read statute now, so okay.
And the other issue is finding out who's ultimately responsible as well. And that would be handled likely if this were to go through whatever rules we came up with in terms of the registration.
And if I was a broker and I paid an LLC and they weren't in good standing, do I have liability? Y'all would have to track the LLC being in good standing, correct?
Which,
Once it was registered?
I think we'd have to work on kind of the details of this. I think where this came from is there are so many sales agents who are advised by
CPA.
right.
Sorry, Ben. You are really messing this up, okay?
I'm kind of curious as to what's the difference between an LLC and an S corp, and why not C corps?
this is what the legislation says. I have no idea why they
So-
focused on those.
So I think the issue where it may be coming from is that an LLC and an S corp are pass-throughs,
Yeah, I think that's.
right? And so they don't really go, C corps pay tax, they are an entity that pay tax to the IRS. LLCs, if I have an LLC and it's got real estate in it that pays me, ultimately my tax return is disregarded. It doesn't even go on. All the operations of the LLC go on my personal Schedule C. And so I think what it's trying to is the pass-through entity.
Yeah.
So my question is, how would a C corp, so a C corp would be excluded business from being?
Well, most of the
Yeah.
agents are being advised to do LLC or S corp because it is pass through. I mean, they're not C corps.
I can have a C corp, right? It's just.
I'm not saying you couldn't have it, I'm just saying.
Yeah, so
you know.
why would we
Yeah.
exempt only those two?
Well, this isn't our language. This was language that was drafted by a legislator, who's asked us to put input on it. So
explain to me in pretend I'm a fifth grader, what are we trying to do here?
We're not trying to do anything.
We're not trying to do
No,
anything. I'm
I'm
bringing this to all of your attention because this was filed last session and it died and it's been resurrected this session as a possible bill that's gonna be
So
filed.
what's different in this proposal?
Than
Than what we're doing right now.
License, so it would eliminate the license as a broker entity, right, and it would change it to a registration if it's a certain type of corporation and they only receive compensation and no other brokerage activity.
Because currently, if somebody is set up this way and they're doing this, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, and they're not, and the business entity is not licensed with us, it's unlicensed activity.
Yeah, you can't receive a compensation unless, or a commission unless you're licensed.
I can only pay a license.
But this is an issue.
But it's not just licensed, they have to have a broker sponsoring them, which is the problem, because I'm not gonna take on the liability of my agent's LLC.
Right.
When they could be handling real properties and all this other stuff, and they could get sued.
And that's
But
on you.
I'm the broker that's responsible for that? Nope, you're on your own there, buddy. And, I mean, I don't care in most instances, because it's people that have been advised by their CPAs to form an LLC to save them tax money. Okay, if that's all they're doing, I'm okay with that, and I'll pay, and lots of brokers are paying them because they don't know. Because we've had several mergers that people we merged with were paying their LLCs, and we're going, no, you can't do that, we're not paying you, and then they leave us.
So
And this
it's-
allows it as long as it's
This
registered.
fixes that, right?
Yeah.
Because then you don't have to have a sponsor. Or,
So that's what I was getting to. So this would then mean that this agent, current agent LLC requirement for a sponsored broker goes away.
For this particular compensation issue. If there's
Assuming that this entity doesn't do
any of the harmful activity.
does that feel right, Abby?
Yeah, and so I think just, so kind of some background, so because there's lots of sales agents getting this advice to form these LLCs, these pass-through entities, but they are not understanding that if they are receiving compensation through the entity, that triggers a license. They've got to have a license.
We have
So
this
I think-
conversation every day.
Yes, and so I think what this is trying to address is this sort of proliferation of sales agent-owned LLCs where they're not aware there is a license, there's a licensure requirement. And so it's trying to address, okay, sales agents, if all you're doing, you created this entity just to receive compensation, we will accept you, this is what the potential bill would say, we would accept you from having to have a license. It would just be a registration requirement. The consumer will still be able, through this registration requirement, the consumer would still be able to find the person responsible, but there's not that license requirement, which requires the designated broker, the E&O insurance in certain cases, the
Okay,
whole shebang.
that's helpful.
It changes our E&O though, because the E&O companies don't want to cover the LLCs of all the agents.
Can I write on the board real quick and kind of, what I'm thinking, I'm not sure. And I don't want to belabor this, but I know this is a legislative.
He's the one advising all these agents.
We have a broker, right? Individual or corporation?
It doesn't matter.
Could be either.
Okay, we have an agent. Right, individual or LLC?
Individual.
Individual.
Yes, human.
These are individuals, right? Okay, so basically what you're saying is that if this agent has an LLC, right,
Mhm.
then that means you can't pay fee or commissions this way?
You
Right.
can't.
Unless it is
Licensed.
licensed with TREC.
Unless the LLC is licensed.
Yeah, the LLC's got to carry a license.
like that, right?
No, the LLC.
That LLC has to
LLC
also.
up to TREC.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go.
And this would enable us to pay them without having a license, but they can do no brokerage activity. All they can do is collect compensation.
Is it only on one deal, or could they create the LLC for multiple?
They can do as many LLCs as possible.
All they're
Because
doing
this
is.
LLC is gonna be subject to
Oh, okay,
license
for multiple.
requirements.
It will,
Right. It will be now, currently
It is.
it is, sorry.
and that will exempt them.
As long as there's a registration. There is a
They'll
revenue.
then have a
Yeah,
registration.
There is a revenue.
I was gonna say, now you
Yeah,
got
that's what I was
revenue
saying, that's
impact.
where I was going, yeah.
But
But
you
you
got
have
revenue
to
impact.
attach a fee to the
Yeah,
registration
you can
process.
address
There
that
you
in the
go.
So,
registration
but if
process.
the broker is an LLC, then they would have to,
I don't think the broker needs to be LLC then.
The broker's already an LLC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and
but-
they're doing brokerage activity beyond the compensation, right?
Yeah.
right, because then that would be
We
going,
hope.
they would be, yes, because they would be paying their agents and whatever else, so that would be,
Well,
I think that's already in place.
well, here you
It's in
have
place now.
broker as an individual and then broker as the firm, right? So
Yes.
the entity,
Right.
and the entity has to be
Right.
registered here, right?
Licensed.
They don't have to.
so for the
That's
most part,
right.
agents.
They do.
They do.
They do currently, but
Right.
we're trying to,
But this
Simplify.
bill would remove that requirement, so they would no longer, if they met these requirements just to pay compensation, they would no longer need to be licensed, they would have to be registered.
so do you have agents working as LLCs?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
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 They want to.
Yeah, because, I mean,
Yeah.
and it's simply that, I mean, they weren't, right? And then they get, you know, tax advice usually
Well,
that says, hey, you should be an LLC.
the formation of an
My
LLC
taxes
has,
is
is
liability.
twofold. One is for limited liability protection,
Right.
which is a legal
Right.
thing, and then tax benefits, right?
But the ones I talk to, what they buy into is the tax benefit, because, you know, we're covering their E&O and stuff, so.
Yeah, you're paying less tax.
You know, so that's really what,
Anybody that would, the problem with C corps is the dual taxation, right?
right, so most
You
of,
pay
like,
money going, you pay money.
I don't have any
in,
of
but
those
you
C
pay
corps.
out.
I don't think
I-
Well, let's watch this, because,
Well, what?
yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Well, what, and this came up last session because we actually called out a member of the legislature who is also a license holder who was receiving compensation that did through an LLC without that entity being licensed.
Yeah.
And so then you didn't like that. So, but I do think this is confusing. There's probably room for toggling to do it as a registration, but we'll sit tight and watch it. But it's, if y'all have thoughts on it, or if you think about something later, please pass it to us, because we're often sitting in a room trying to wrap our brain around changes to legislation, and it's helpful to hear from you on it.
What it forces the agent who wants that to do is they have to go through all the education and make sure their experience level is satisfactory, that they go ahead and get their broker's license. And they don't like it when we tell them that, because that's not what the CPAs have told them. And it takes time to get a broker's license.
Let me ask you this question, would our input affect this bill?
Yeah, the legislature has asked
It
us.
would?
Yeah,
They've asked
us-
for information.
They've asked
Oh,
us
okay,
to
good.
sit down and talk to them about it. I don't
Make sure
know,
We're just not barking up the tree.
Oh, no, it's real, it's big.
We're in a good position right now with the legislature that they circle back to us, and because we have a good relationship with Texas Realtors, that, you know, if we share information and kind of tag team on such things, and they are very
Yeah.
powerful at the legislature.
yeah.
and just to weigh in on that, this bill initially was filed to exempt them entirely. It was through working with us and with TR to get to this point where it's significantly better than it was as filed last session, where it just would have
Yeah,
exempted.
TR have a lot of interest in it.
Yeah, I see it as a legal protection more so than an actual brokerage activity. So I can see how that exemption would, you know, to the extent that they wanna operate in an LLC, it's for legal protection purposes, not so much as operating a brokerage firm.
Right, and in terms of the consumer protection aspect of it, if you can find who's ultimately responsible for that.
Yeah,
And
especially
that
if
could
the
be
broker's
happened through
responsible for it.
happen through the registration process that addresses some of that consumer protection.
But
concern.
the way this is written, the LLC should never even be public. It's only between the LLC and the broker.
That's right.
Like if Mark has an LLC, the public does not know that. That's
Right.
just where I pay compensation.
That's correct.
Anything he does with that LLC beyond that, to me, is real estate activity. If he
Yeah,
advertises it or
Right.
That's
whatever.
right.
So-
Except for like the registration, if there was an eventual registration component,
Right.
right.
We had a manager that didn't quite understand the rules, and he had this top producer go ahead and register with TREC the name, so it's a DBA.
Yeah, but a DBA is not an LLC.
It's not the
Right.
same.
Not the same, right.
Okay. All right, that'll be interesting. They've already got it. The deadline, the date, the file hasn't even occurred yet.
Just a couple of things. This is not, exhaustive of what we'll likely work on. There'll be lots of things filed. We'll have people reach out to us. There may be things that pop up that you as a group want us to address. So this is just going on your initiatives from last time.
Question, given the, not normal session, 2 years ago, and what typically there's 6,000-7,000 bills filed or something, I mean, would we anticipate, of which, 2,000 or 3,000 get acted on or something? So would we anticipate this year that it'll be a lot more bills than that because of
Probably.
backlogged?
I
Of course,
would
they
think
still probably only be able to pass the number that
Yeah.
they can.
Every session, it increases
Yeah.
every session.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing there'll be, being the fact that we're not in the COVID session.
Yeah.
There'll be
Well,
more.
we'll start, once bills start getting filed, we'll follow legislation that relates to real estate as subject matter. We'll also follow things that just affect us as an agency, HR changes, finance changes, things like that. But we'll keep this running list and keep you updated on anything. If any of y'all, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in November, but if any of you get asked about bills, we want you, we can coordinate those efforts. And if you want to testify on a bill, you could, if you do so on your own behalf, that's great. But if you say who you are as a TREC commissioner, then let's coordinate.
Yeah, right.
But we can coordinate all that.
One thing that I expected this to cover would be HOAs, and the last time that we talked, there were like 26,000 and y'all had 2,600 registered so far, and yet there's a deadline on the HOAs. Is there any penalty for those HOAs if they don't?
Not from us.
Not from y'all.
There is a statutory remedy, although I don't think it's very heavy on the HOAs if they don't register.
Or any more
But we don't-
coming in?
Yes, ma'am. But we don't have any authority over them. We're just the storage house for that information.
So that's one of the issues that's definitely on the top of Texas Realtors list. And they will, last session we coordinated on what a website could look like. And there was a lot of conversation between us on what that bill ended up looking like. So I expect the same to be true. I think they spend, and I think the same is probably true with TLTA and any other kind of smaller association that we work with. There's a few on the inspector side. They spend the summer collecting feedback for their initiatives and then are, basically now have a package developed of what they will do for the legislative session. So it just this week has been kind of the timing is right to coordinate all of that. But, we're pretty quick to say HOAs, we don't regulate them, so it's not.
Nobody does.
Right, so it's not an initiative of ours. But that will jump on our radar quite quickly just to respond, educate.
Any other questions for Tony? I know you're gonna be busy.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
And Summer
to
too,
help.
they're gonna be a great team.
Yeah, Summer is gonna be involved, so.
We have two more agenda items before we go to 4 and 5. You had a question earlier?
Well, one question I had about this was, when you're talking about an LLC, one of the, Dan said was, it provides them legal protection. So is that gonna, them going through that LLC, is that gonna provide them for more legal protection and when somebody puts a claim against them or a complaint?
Wouldn't think so,
It's,
because the LLC's doing no brokerage
the
activity.
retention is, if they were to get sued, you got the brokerage, you got the agent as well.
Right.
Right.
Yes, sir.
You got the broker and the agent, right?
Right.
And so there's, lawsuit can come from even your own broker, right, anyone. And so it just limits the liability to the LLC and not the individual.
It's just civil liability versus, liability against your license and a disciplinary action.
And
Those
all
things are
brokerage
separate.
is done under the licensee, not the LLC with this one.
It's not a tax issue because they're disregarded by the IRS. The IRS doesn't even recognize them because they're called past dues. They come, my LLC, everything that flows through my LLC comes direct to me. I pay individual federal taxes on rates on those monies, right? I think it's more of a legal protection.
Versus
As
if you're
opposed
not
to-
doing business under the LLC, then I don't see how it's business protection. You know what I mean?
Well,
The individual, if he's doing business under his individual license, then he is individually responsible.
I don't want law attorneys to try to create a way to
Yeah.
reach out and tap you.
And the only reason I ask is because when you talk about it, you're putting money into there. So your compensation is going into the LLC, so then the LLC would be protecting that money. So maybe you couldn't go back and get that fee back from the real estate agent, but you could go to them for their license and give them stuff like that. But that was the only question I had.
The
So,
license owner would still be responsible.
Right, license
So
owners.
if they're violating the License Act, I mean, it's just written right, it is,
yeah,
it's an exemption. So provided there's no evidence of unlicensed activity, there would be no action against this registered LLC. Anything on top of that they did, like in the transaction, that's a violation, it would go against their sponsoring broker and them individually.
yeah. So, do you have people that you pay LLCs to?
No,
Are
I
they,
repeat, no,
are their agents W-2 or
1099.
1099? That's why.
No, it's one because
That's
my
why
lawyer over there.
you're not.
Yeah, I only pay an LLC if they have a broker's license sponsored by a live broker and it's issued by TREC. It's the only time I
And that's
have none of
probably
those.
why they're going after the LLC. They're
Exactly.
1099, they're contractors.
Yeah.
They're not employees that'd be covered under,
But they want us to pay their LLC, and if their LLC does not have a broker's license.
We cannot.
but
We
they're not doing brokerage activity other than working for you, right?
We don't know that.
We don't know, and that's what, we could get sued by a tenant that their LLC goes through the property management that they're doing of their own properties. That tenant can sue us as the broker for them. But we don't broker the LLC, we just broker them as individuals.
It's not as complicated as the tax code, but for a broker, it is. Yeah. I mean, we
Well-
only pay licensed people with TREC.
Well, if I'm your agent and you're paying me as a contractor, then I wanna make sure I'm a registered LLC to get legal protection, to protect me.
Well,
And so that I could run business expenses.
but you're gonna have to find another broker because the broker
Or
cannot
get
pay
your
an
broker's
LLC
license.
unless it has a license with TREC.
Right.
Period.
And that's what the exemption.
Right.
Okay.
Other question? You had another question earlier?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't know, I wasn't aware that I could ask questions, so I wrote something down earlier when we're talking about changing to brokers, inspectors, and agents when their due date comes up, they come inactive the day after. So, and maybe this is my ignorance for not knowing the real estate agent side and broker side as well. If the broker goes inactive, what happens to the agents underneath them?
They're all inactive.
So they're all inactive, so let's just, in case it could happen, right, or, probably won't, maybe won't, hopefully won't, but what happens if we get 800 brokers that go inactive the first time that we do this, and they've got 50 to 60 agents under them each, now we've held up, not 40, sorry. Sorry, but, you know, now we have this many transactions, this much money sitting on the table, like, is there, something that we're trying to put in place to ease it into that, or?
If I may, that's the way the current process works.
Okay.
So if a broker, that's why they have much higher renewal rates. They renew timely because they're either serving as designated broker for a business entity that sponsors agents, or they're sponsoring agents under their individual license. But that is the current process. If a broker license expires, eventually the business entity that they are the designated broker for will go inactive, and then all the agents sponsored by that business entity will go inactive, and any agents sponsored under the individual broker license will also be inactivated. That's part of our normal expiration process.
Is there gonna be like a special requirement to, I don't know, do a Zoom class or something for brokers to get this information out? Because we all know that an email is not gonna do
TBD.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just, you know, I think in my mind first went to like, what happens if you're at 12,000, all of a sudden, contracts that are up for question because the broker didn't do it and all his agents can't, or his or her agents can't act until that's get done. And now you held up, you know, this many contracts for another 2 or 3 weeks. So that was just, that was a thought, and just making sure that that was accounted for before like implementing that rule. I know it's further down the road. That's how my mind.
Thank you for being here today, and I know you introduced yourself to Scott. Can you tell us who you are?
Sure. I'm sorry. I know, and I'm the only person in here that doesn't work here, so I was like, I don't know if this is supposed to, because I asked them, I was like, is this open? Can I go to that? And they're like, yeah. So my name's Brad Caldwell. I work for Greenworks. So Greenworks started as a home inspection company about 2009. We have about 60 inspectors. So I started as a home inspector with them and then moved up and done some different things since then. Do business development and growth now. So one of the things that we were looking at is doing more CE courses for, for agents and brokers and offices and stuff like that. So kind of wanted to see how things work in here and give some better ideas about what's coming down the road. So I have some more information to pass along when we start doing those again. And then, we're a pretty big home inspection company. So we just I wanted to see if there was any opportunity for us to get involved and maybe help out in any aspect that we can, because we do have, a couple 100+ employees, and, be part of a real estate commission where you don't really get to nobody knows you, nobody, you don't have any say or anything like that. Just didn't make sense to us. So I was just like, I'll just come and kind of fill it out and see what's going on. And if y'all needed anything from me, I'm here for it. Or heck, if I get to actually ask questions, that's much better for me.
Yeah. Excellent.
So we're all across all of Texas. We're based out of DFW is where we started, but we're Austin, San Antonio, Houston, West Texas. I've got several cities over there that we cover and stuff like that. So we will be nationwide probably by the end of the year. We'll be in 2 or 3 other states, but what's funny is I can get y'all my card from when I was my last position, but right now my position has changed not too long ago. So this is me trying to learn my new role and everything like that, to figure out which way to go. So I'm the VP of Business Development and Growth right now. So I can get y'all the stuff for Greenworks and everything like that. So I'll probably walk out here in a minute and go get some cards.
We appreciate you being here, and we're going to post for a public member for the inspection committee, a public member.
We already have, but we've got another one
Coming up
right?
for professionals. So yeah, stay, watch for that and get engaged, definitely.
We'll be back in November.
Yes, yeah. All right, let's, thank you. Let's go to agenda item number 4, future workshop. I know November we have the biennial training.
We've got calendaring that we talked about yesterday.
Anything else?
I don't know that this is a workshop agenda item, but at some point I would love to talk about this, and I know I've talked about it with staff, is when you go to our website, it just says, like, if you're a broker, it doesn't say where you work or whatever else, it just says you're a broker. So associate broker could be with anybody. Is there any way that we can talk about maybe putting some association on there and maybe
Associate, like, we have broker associates and they're not listed under us, even though,
Right.
yeah. somehow tying them in
Yes.
somehow. I know you can do it on the paper, but it doesn't show up on the computer.
Paper, but not anything that comes to TREC.
Yeah, it's all through an IC agreement.
And an IABS, right?
I was thinking an associate broker could register under the broker that way. No?
No.
Okay.
No,
But that's
it's
another
its
question,
own
that's
license.
another question I have too. So if you're an associate broker working with a broker and you get in trouble and your name is gonna be on that contract because that's where they work, I mean, where does that liability fall? Because you're probably gonna be pulled in.
I'm an associate broker under
Yes.
my corporate
Sure.
license.
Well, and I think, and Commissioner Graves is right, if to the extent you want to put a discussion about, I'm not gonna give you a great topic, but the associate broker relationship on the website, I think it's something, I know that in our looking at it, it ends up coming down to like, what's our role as and from an enforcement standpoint, as a licensing agency, what do we regulate, what relationship, business relationships versus the regulatory component of it. But we can add that as, even if it's a presentation item.
Yeah, we can discuss adding the item, but we cannot discuss the item.
Correct.
Okay,
So-
let-
Right, so
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can, I can make that part of the list and have that discussion at the.
Okay, associate broker, any other items?
I just want to keep the legislative updates on. I mean, I've
You
been
want-
moved to
okay,
that
yeah,
anyway,
sure.
but we need to keep that.
Legislative
Those are
updates.
the next 2 meetings.
Okay, any other items that we need to,
One of the things we're gonna talk about, meeting formats, was that?
yeah,
Yes.
Kind of calendaring formats, days of meetings, that sort of thing. We'll put out a survey in the next week or so that asks those questions that then you can talk about in November. I'm going to add one to the list, and that is, how do we do with the tablets? Can we completely eliminate the books, that sort of thing? So we'll ask that question in the survey so we can keep making progress on less paper.
so the survey's gonna say workshops, how many workshops, topics, days, times?
Yeah.
I mean,
What do you like? What do you want us to change? What works best for you? That sort of thing. And just for warning, we're looking, if you want to stick to a Monday commission meeting and a workshop on Tuesday, then we'll look at certain calendar dates for the next calendar year, right? If you want to think about doing a workshop on a Thursday afternoon with a commission meeting on Friday morning, so those are the different calendar dates, right? So we'll come up with some scenarios and we'll get your, number one, your availability, but then also your preference on days of the week
Okay.
and format.
well, I'm gonna bring up agenda item, we'll discuss it, and I am gonna discuss it. TWIA goes outside Austin twice a year for meetings. And I know it's hard on staff, and don't get me wrong, but, if we did do that, I mean, like, Vanessa could present for other staff members. I don't think we'd have to travel all the staff, but I think that's something I would love to look at. Maybe do one in Houston, do one in
Yeah, maybe
Dallas, Fort Worth,
start with one a year.
Do you want to know if that's on the?
No,
We'll add that to the survey.
but yeah, just,
And on the, the laptop deals, getting rid of books, would you then, ahead of the meeting, just send us a link to where we could look at that?
Yes.
Well,
So now we send an email, Amber sends in, it says the materials are up, they can be found here.
Right,
And they're
right.
just on the website, so you would get that.
Yeah.
And of course, you always have the option to print.
yeah, but does it
your own
have
book.
everything that's in the book?
Yes, it does, with the exception of anything I send separately, that's under cover. Yeah, so it's exactly the same.
Okay.
That's
fine.
And you can always, to the extent you require a paper copy, you need it for that reason, you can come talk to me about it.
okay, anything else? I would, entertain a motion to adjourn unless I've missed anything.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, all in favor?
All right.
All right, motion carries. Thank y'all
Thank you.
for your time. Are we offline?
No,
I was gonna-